All right, welcome everybody to our final Forgotten Grapes virtual tasting of 2025. This is our December virtual tasting, and we are so excited to be joined by Dom O'Reilly, the co-owner and winemaker of Doctor's Orders, who has us. He's with us here tonight, taking time out of his busy holiday schedule to join us. As always, we appreciate all of your comments. We're going to be muting everybody for the chat, so we will have you in the chat if you want to uh, leave any comments, questions, food pairings, whatever you might want to. Allison and I will be monitoring those, and we will go from there. One important thing, this is the last virtual tasting of 2025, and it is also our last virtual tasting in this format because Allison and I are going our separate ways in 2026. I am going to keep the Forgotten Grapes Wine Club going. So we will continue to do our virtual tastings. We're going to take January off, but we are going to start back again strong in February. I'll be sending out an email in a few weeks with all of our new wineries and what we're going to be doing, but keep an eye out for that. But it's been so much fun for the last 4 years working with Allison on this. She's been great to bring in so many fun wineries and has been great on the virtual tastings. So I appreciate everything that she has done for us. Allison, do you want to say anything?
Nope, nothing to say.
Perfect. Awesome. So yeah, this is the end of the year, but it is not the end of the club, which is very exciting. So awesome. All right. With that being said, we want to kick things off, and Dom, you can unmute yourself if you want to. We've got Dominic Riley, the winemaker of Doctor's Orders, our December featured winery of the month. And Dom, we always start our virtual tastings by asking, what is the most memorable bottle of wine that you have ever opened?
Hey everyone, pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Chris.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, I was thinking about that earlier today, and there's a number of wines that I've had that are very memorable, and I was kind of chewing between two of them. So I'll say what I think is number one, but I might drop number two in there as well.
That's okay. We
I
love that.
had good. I had a 2009 Domaine Jamais Côte Rôtie
Mm.
back in I want to say it was 2015 when I was living in Australia, and I had had Côte Rôtie before, but I don't think it ever had anything that was that peppery,
Mhm.
herbaceous, very like cured meat, saucisson, black pepper, and that just absolutely captivated me, and is one of the reasons that I'm always seeking kind of cooler climate Syrah vineyards for our project. So I think that like that's a wine that just always comes to mind whenever someone says like, "Hey, what's your favorite wine?" It's a hard question to answer. Obviously, as a winemaker, we're all nerds and we spend so much time tasting different wines. And, I feel like I always have a new obsession of some kind. And
Yep.
so it does kind of change frequently, but like that's just a wine that will always come back to my memory. And I can recall it as if it was yesterday.
That sounds amazing. All right, we have to ask what the second one is. You've teased us
Oh,
with
yeah.
it, so
Okay, so the second one was 1995, Domaine
okay.
Leroy.
Mm.
Um, And that was the first like really, really high end Burgundy I'd ever had. And I grew up in the Willamette Valley in Oregon and making Pinot Noir since a young age. And I just never had it with that kind of stance and elegance before. And it really had a lasting impact on me.
Nice. Was there a specific appellation that that one came from, or
I actually don't remember.
okay?
I'm sure there was, but I don't remember. I was trying to think about that earlier and I couldn't remember which
Nice.
appellation it was.
Yeah, I love a good Côte Rôtie, and I mean, we can talk about growing Syrah here in California, but I just find like no Syrah I've had in California matches that herbaceousness, that
No.
meatiness, that smokiness that you get from the Northern Rhone, whether it's Grenache, Côte Rôtie, Hermitage, even some of the Saint Josephs, even though that's a little more approachable for some. But
Yes.
yeah. It's an amazing, amazing place. So you mentioned you grew up in the Willamette Valley, and we would be remiss to not, talk a little bit about your background because you
Yeah.
come from a wine family, a fairly famous wine family, wine royalty, some might say. Tell us a little bit about that and what it was like growing up, in the wine business on a winery, and why you decided to stay in the business, but to do something completely different.
Yeah, of course. So I grew up in Newburgh, Oregon, just outside of Portland in the Willamette Valley. My family owns Owen Rowe Winery. My dad is David O'Reilly, the owner. And he has kind of a wild story for how he got into wine, but we could kind of talk forever about that. Maybe we'll circle back at some point. But um, yeah, I just grew up from a young age seeing him work really hard in the vineyards and the winery, and I was just as a young kid, just really curious about what dad was doing all the time. So I kept asking to tag along to things, and finally he would start dragging me around. And I think it started really in the vineyard because we had vineyards very close to us. At times we lived on vineyard properties. So he would do vineyard visits during the harvest season and the growing season at least once a week. He would set foot in every single vineyard he sourced or farmed at least once a week, which is a practice that's stuck with me since then. I feel like that's one of the biggest things that he's passed on to me. Um, so I just remember this fascination of walking through a vineyard, asking questions about why the vines were trained in such a way, or why the soil wasn't tilled, or why we weren't watering this vineyard versus that vineyard. Why the grapes tasted different on the vines at some periods and not others. Why we were cropping some vineyards higher and some not higher. Just very, very curious and really inquisitive. And I think my dad saw that I was just interested in learning more about the wine business. And by the time I was about 10 years old, he said, "Hey, if you want to come work summers at the winery, you can sweep floors and clean drains." So I did that for a little while and really enjoyed it. It was really cool to see what was happening in the winemaking process in the winery itself. Having been in vineyards already for a couple of years, it was a very interesting thing for me to see truckloads of grapes coming in and getting pressed and barreling down and bottling and marketing and wine tastings and all that kind of fun stuff. Robert Parker coming through the winery, those were all really memorable experiences of mine. By the time I was maybe 12 or 13, I just said to my dad, "Hey, like I want to try this. I want to try to make my own wine." Like I know I'm literally 13, but I want to try it. So he said, "Okay, cool. There's this little block on this vineyard, and if you can farm it, you can make it." So I think that was maybe March of 2003. And me and a couple of my buddies would go out every Saturday, sometimes Friday afternoons, and just farm. We would make sure the irrigation was on or off. For the most part, we didn't irrigate much up there in the Willamette Valley. We would,
Pretty damp, pretty wet up there.
it's pretty damp. Yeah, it's very green. Yeah, so we would do everything, from pruning all the way until harvest. And I made a single barrel of a Pinot Noir blend. It was Pinot Noir and a Grenache, actually, which is kind of a really, really odd mix, but it was,
Yeah.
which is why my dad gave me that block. I think somebody had planted it as an experiment, and he was like, "Well, I'm not going to use this, so you can try it." Anyway, I made this wine from start to finish at the age of 13, and was just blown away by the process. And I completely screwed it up. The wine is terrible, but I just
But you're
remember,
13. That's
yeah,
how you get away
exactly.
with it.
I mean, I think everyone screws up their first wine, no matter how old you are, but if they don't, props to them. But I was just so fascinated by the process and seeing that you can be a farmer one day, a chemist the next day, microbiologist the next, and then at some point you got to be brand conscious. You have to be business focused.
You gotta be a salesman. Yep.
Just you have to be a salesman. It's the whole thing, and that like combination really, really fascinated me. So I started just getting obsessed with flavors back in those days. My family lived on a farm. We had, let's see, I think about 5 acres of organic vegetables, and we had a small amount of livestock. We had a couple cattle and a couple pigs and a large herd of sheep. So we were kind of self-sufficient, even though we were right next to a huge city, which is Portland. We were also like kind of growing our own food, which was fun. So I kind of just got stuck in this little focus moment in my high school years of paying attention to flavors, having to pair wine and food together. My dad's European, both my parents are immigrants, so wine was just a part of the household when we were kids.
Mhm.
Um, Not large quantities, but we would always have a glass of wine with dinner every single night, no matter what. So, just starting to kind of think about pairings and all these things were really interesting to me.
Did
So
you
that,
did you
yeah,
guys ever did you guys ever own vineyards?
yes, my family owns and they still do owns, I think 4 vineyards, very large. I think they have about 3,000 acres under vine that they
Oh,
own.
wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they're doing is because you have Owen Row and then they also have the Ex Umbris label. Is that
Yeah, they
also
have, I'd say that they probably at this point have a dozen labels.
okay?
Owen Row is the main high-end wine brand, and that's the name of the company. They have Ex Umbris, they have Sinister Hand, they have Corvidae, they have O'Reilly's, and they have there's a new one that I
Surprised you
never
didn't get a
worked on.
cease and desist from O'Reilly's.
Legally, they can't cease and desist because it's our last name.
And
You can always use
it's a
your own name,
completely different industry too.
and it's a
So
different
yeah,
industry.
no,
Yeah.
that's funny.
But yeah, so I grew up in that, that world and was very fascinated by it. And I've known a few people who grew up in the wine business that despised it. And,
Yeah,
I think I'm very fortunate that my dad gave me this window into the world at a young age. Was likely if it had been later in my teenage years, I was very rebellious. I'm still super rebellious. We're all rebels in our company. But um, I think if I had been exposed to this at the age of 16 or 17, I probably would never be a winemaker. So I'm very grateful for that young experience. And,
yeah.
being a second generation winemaker is pretty cool. You get to watch somebody do well and make mistakes, and you get to learn from other people's mistakes before you make them yourself. And that I think that's really boosted my career quite a lot.
Absolutely. We'll talk a little bit about how you've really kind of, gone in a completely different direction than your
Yeah.
father and that company. But we want to make sure everybody's, got their wine and is open. So we're starting with your 2023 rosé of Grenache right here from the Santa Barbara County. All right, I have to ask, like when you were making that wine at 13 and you had your friends helping you in the vineyards, did you have to like Tom Sawyer them into it? Did you have to, trick them and explain like, oh man, I'll feed you all the grapes you want if you help me, prune and tend and
There was a little bit
dill
of
and
that. There's a little bit of that. Honestly, my friends really loved coming to hang out with us because my parents were just different and they would let us do like crazy stuff. So, most of my friends were city kids. They lived either in Portland or Hillsborough or Beaverton or somewhere nearby,
Mhm.
like Oswego. So getting out to hang with me meant you're in the countryside. We had riverfront property. We're on the Willamette River. We could go kayaking. We could go fishing. I had a bow, so you go bow hunting. We had a farm. You could go chase sheep all day. And then, going to the vineyard was cool. And then, my dad was a great chef, so he would cook us all a big meal at the end of the day and pour everyone a glass of wine. And,
Yeah,
that was an
that's heaven
experience
for a
that,
13-year-old boy. If
yeah,
there was only
not a lot of
boobs
13-year-olds
involved, it
gets
would be
that.
perfect. Yeah,
Sadly, I couldn't provide that, but
that's
we
okay.
got everything else.
Exactly. That's amazing. So you know, sort of got your first bad batch out of the way, which is great when you're that young, and then had an appreciation for it. Um, I know you sort of in college, you kind of moved into different directions, as you mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
you got into fashion. So was it always in the back of your mind to get back to wine, or were you thinking about pursuing a career in a different area?
Yeah, I was thinking about a few things. I kind of had a lot of things in my head when I was 18. Um, Girls, guns, love, a bunch of other, random things. I almost chased a girl to New York to do sound engineering at Columbia University. Um, Decided not to do that.
You,
Almost went to
if
UCLA.
I was gonna say
Decided
if
not
that
to do that.
sliding door had happened, you'd probably be friends with a good friend of mine who's a sound engineer in New York.
Oh,
So there,
nice.
yeah.
That's awesome. I ended up just going to a small school and studying philosophy. I thought that people are not focusing much on education these days, and I knew I had a lot of talent from various things that I had been doing, and I wanted to pull back from a career-minded study and just be in Southern California and study philosophy. So I did that. I only lasted 2 years. I never actually graduated college, which is funny.
Where did you
But
end up going to school? Because you said you almost went to UCLA.
yeah, it's a school called Thomas Aquinas College in Ojai.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
So that's what brought me to Ojai.
Ah,
Um,
there we go.
and yeah, so the other things I was kind of toying with at the time was photography. I was doing some stuff in photo world, and I also was obsessed with aviation. I wanted to be a pilot,
Hmm.
and I actually signed up for I forget what the program's called now. It was some accelerated program to join the Marine Corps to be a potential pilot, helicopter pilot in combat. And
Oh, wow.
I am so thankful I didn't do that. I don't really, I was never like a military type kid either. And I grew up in like liberal Portland. So I'm not exactly sure what tweaked my mind into thinking that, but it did.
You know,
And
when
I
you grow up
remember
a certain way, you sometimes feel the calling to go the completely opposite route.
exactly. So I
It
remember
sounds
like
powerful. It
calling,
sounds powerful to be like a Navy aviation
Yeah.
totally,
military guy.
totally.
You you
And
were
hey,
you
you know
were
what?
you were dazzled by those commercials with the like knight who was on the chessboard slashing
100%.
at the evil knight and or the evil king and queen and whatnot. Yes.
Absolutely. And still, like, if I've got a sleepless night at 3 a.m., I'm absolutely watching Black Hawk helicopter videos screaming through mountain ranges. So, I mean, that would have been
Nice.
pretty badass. But
Yes.
thankfully, my dad talked me out of that one. He told me some stories that he had of being in Belfast, Ireland during the Troubles and
Mhm.
exactly what it's like to watch someone die and, be a part of the violence and the problem and not the solution.
Yeah.
And that cleaned me up pretty fast. So I decided to not do that. And so at that time, I was kind of exploring some things, and I had got an email from Adam Tomac at Ojai Vineyard, and he had heard that I was in town. He was a big fan of my dad's wines. He said, "Hey, are you interested in a harvest position this year?" And I was had just finished sophomore year in college, and I was going into my junior year. I've kind of been thinking that I might want to leave school. I was just got really bored of reading books all day, so I thought, hey, you know what? That sounds kind of cool. And so I kind of explored around. I also got a job offer from Manfred Krenkel at Sinnequina.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, sort of two kind of powerhouse wineries and
Yeah, but
very,
very
very,
different
very different
experiences.
styles.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm sure I would have really enjoyed both of them. But at the time, coming from Oregon and coming from a kind of more restrained European focus of winemaking, I felt like Adam Tomac at Ojai Vineyard would probably be a great mentor for me.
Mhm.
And he was. And so that was probably the best decision I ever made in my life was leaving school and working for Adam Tomac. And he's by far my greatest mentor.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You mentioned, going to school in California, staying in Ojai. Was California always a draw to you, or was it simply the pursuits that you were looking at? California was kind of the main hub for those.
Yeah, more the latter. It's a great question. When I grew up in Oregon, everyone in Oregon hates Californians. There's a
That is true.
stereotype. In
Coloradans do
fact,
too,
yeah,
Washingtonians,
exactly.
Nevadans,
I
Arizonans.
remember driving up, I think 2 years ago with my car that had a California license plate, driving up to my family just to visit for the holidays or something. I remember driving around in Portland and someone was yelling at me, go back to California, just some like hobo on the street. And I was like, what the hell, dude? I'm from Oregon. And I realized I was driving a California car. Like, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I
And
mean, that was the vibe. It was like, oh, California makes everything expensive. California is just Hollywood. Everything's fake. It's a terrible place. Blah, blah. That
so
was kind of what I heard growing up.
everything north of, Napa is basically Oregon South, like,
Absolutely.
Chico,
Absolutely.
Redding, that whole Jefferson area. Yeah.
And then I, came down and was in Ojai and realized that that was just completely false. California is a wonderful place, and
Yeah.
sure, LA has its problems. There's traffic, there's all sorts of stuff going on, but the food culture in LA is incredible,
That's
and
true.
the opportunities. You've got one of the biggest cities in the world, and then Ojai in particular is just this beautiful place, Transverse Valley. There's a lot of history and meaning in that valley and it's only an hour from LA. So I kind of fell in love with the region. And after working with Adam Tomac for almost 5 years, I realized that the wine region there was both unexplored and very interesting and something that I maybe would want to set roots in and really help kind of pioneer it and figure it out.
Very cool.
When you say that an unexplored region, I mean obviously Ojai is that own and there are vineyards
Hmm.
there. But how do you sort of place it from the San Ynez Valley to the Malibu coast where you sit in between?
Yeah, it's very different. So the Santa Barbara County, what we think of Santa Barbara County for grape growing really is the has to be on the north side of the hills behind Santa Barbara.
Hmm.
So once you go over Sadis Pass on the 154, which kind of goes through the town of Santa Barbara and then up and over the pass, and then you're in San Ynez. That's really the start of what we call Santa Barbara County for grape growing. And that valley is very different. Once you cross the mountains, once you get on the other side of the Horn on the water on the west side, you get freezes every year, deep freezes. You get very different soil types, different climate for sure, and a very different culture too. So the whole thing is different, and I like it. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but it's very different from Ojai. Ojai is rocky. Ojai is hot. Ojai is only 9 miles from the coast as the crow flies, so it's very close to the ocean. There are very few places in Santa Barbara County that are 9 miles from the ocean, even in Santa Rita Hills. Um, so you get this like I think very extreme microclimate, and even Santa Barbara County is known for its extreme diurnal swings and microclimates, and I'm sure we can talk about that as we taste these wines. But Ojai has a more dramatic swing than any winemaking region I've ever been to.
Hmm.
And I've worked in Australia, worked in New Zealand, Oregon, Washington, Northern California, Southern California, kind of all over. And I mean, even earlier this week, it was 86 degrees at the winery and 39 degrees at night.
Yeah, that's a big shift right there.
That's insane. And that it's very, very rare that you'll see that in a growing region, just very
Yeah.
rare. And then, in parts, some of our vineyards are almost 3,000 feet in Ojai. So we
Yeah.
get 3,000 feet, you get these crazy diurnal swings. You end up with these like really, really expressive wines that are very high acid. And so I think kind of long-winded answer, but Ojai is it's very unique. There's not a lot of transverse valleys in the world, and it's one
Mhm.
of them. And it has very, very steep, huge hillsides that are really rocky. It's got a good aquifer, so there's water, and it's completely virgin land. There's basically no farming in Ojai except for some citrus. So,
Hmm.
and there's no vineyards. I control all of the vineyards except for two that I can think of.
Okay. Nice. It reminds me a little bit of, and since you have worked in Northern California, maybe you can kind of, or you've been all over the Central Valley. It reminds me a little
Hmm.
bit of like Chalone in
Hmm.
Monterey County, where it's that kind of high elevation, isolated, and Chalone is really its own AVA, almost a monopole, really. Um,
Yes.
but so different from the rest of Monterey County. And I feel like Ojai is the same way. Is there a reason why they haven't designated out Ojai as its own AVA? Is it simply just there's not enough wineries there, or wineries that are pulling from there to kind of get it going? Because it does seem with that high elevation compared to the rest of Santa Barbara County, it does sort of scream out for its own AVA.
It does. I agree. And it's something that I'm working on right now.
Okay.
In general, the USDA and the TTB they don't care. They're not proactive about
Sure.
creating AVAs
Yeah, it
or
has to be a
or
grassroots
marketing the wine
thing.
regions.
Yeah, it has to
Right.
be
So it's very
started by the
different
wineries.
than AOCs or DOCs in Europe, in France and Italy. So here, really, you have to go out and get it, and there's a whole application, and you have to do a lot of, um, soil samples and
Right.
weather analysis, and prove that it's a unique region from the surrounding ones, which I know won't be hard. It's just a lot of work,
Yeah.
and there's only three winemakers really in Ojai. It's me.
Wow.
There's four. It's me. It's the two Krankles and Adam Tomac. So there's really
And
not
don't
much.
don't you also consider Olga on
Oh
Ojai?
yes, of course. Olga is there. Yep, I forgot about that.
She's
So
new.
yeah,
She's
but
new.
she is new, and she makes her wines in Sonoma. So I keep forgetting that they're Ojai based.
Yeah. But
But yes,
and knowing her vineyard, because I dread driving there because I get car sick each time driving myself up that hill. But is elevation a key with the other vineyards? Because I haven't been to the other vineyards in Ojai, but she's up there. Is Adam's vineyard high or?
so as far as I know, she is the highest elevation vineyard in Ojai. Mine my Grenache vineyard is not quite that high. It's about 1,700 feet. So she's definitely higher. She's in if I were her, I would try to designate that as its own AVA, but probably not enough acres under vine to do that.
Oh, like a
It's
Chalone or something.
Yeah,
Right.
it's on
Yeah.
so it's on the north, sorry, the south face of and south facing face of Sulphur Mountain. And Sulphur Mountain faces the ocean. So if you're
Okay.
standing in the vineyard on a clear day, you can actually see out to the ocean. You can see the Channel Islands. It's very cool. Um, but because it's on the other side of the crest of the hill, you actually don't get any of the Ojai influence. So I would argue in a way it's not an Ojai vineyard. It's
Yeah.
really kind of a vineyard of its own. It's very unique. It's a mountain vineyard. But it does not get the kind of temperature differentials that you'll see in the Ojai Valley itself. It will not be quite as warm, but it does get cold at night.
Yes. Do you have other winemakers, other wineries sort of coming to you, coming to these others, not to, for you to speak for them, but are they
Yeah,
starting to discover the difference of the Ojai grapes and, starting to come to you to say, hey, we want we want grapes from this area to make these wines because it's such a unique area.
honestly, not really.
Okay.
There are some. Nick Krenkel, who is Manfred's son, is one of my best friends, and we do a lot of winemaking together and dinners together and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he's very fascinated with Ojai, and I know he would like to plant a vineyard here at some point. And his dad has a great vineyard in Ojai that he uses for his own wines. Oh, the problem with Ojai is that land is expensive.
Right.
Land is hard to come by, and there's just not a ton of research on viticulture here. So, you could go to Santa Barbara County and say, oh, I could go to Ballard Canyon and plant Syrah. I could go to San Ynez and do Sauvignon Blanc or Cabernet. I could go to Santa Rita Hills and do Chardonnay Pinot. I can go to Santa Maria and do Chardonnay Pinot and Syrah. Like, we don't have that history here. And so there's a bit of a Wild West attitude, I think, in Ojai. And
Hmm.
I'm definitely not helping with that because I like to be a rebel and do my own thing. So I'm
So good.
planting weird Italian varietals and just kind of unknown stuff, and that's helpful for me to kind of experience and experiment with what works and what doesn't. But at the same time, I think it doesn't really do justice to bring in to help new wineries come in and really understand what to plant there.
Interesting. Before we continue on, because it's a fascinating line of questioning, I do want to talk
Yeah.
a little bit about the
Yes.
rosé,
Yes.
and we'll definitely circle back to that. But one of the very cool things about this rosé is that you source grapes from the Chumash Land Trust,
Hmm.
and grapes that are overseen by a friend of the virtual tasting, friend of the wine club, Tara Gomez, who we featured, their wines here. I believe it was last year or 2 years ago. I think it was
Oh, cool.
June of 2024 that we featured their wines in here, which is pretty awesome. But we love Tara, we love Maria, um, beautiful wines. But how did you come upon this particular vineyard? Take us through making a rosé of Grenache. And one of the cool things we're doing here tonight, I know you all got the email tonight, but we're doing Grenache four ways, which is cool. And after we talk about the rosé, I do want to get into sort of your interest in Grenache, but take
Mhm.
us through the making of this rosé, how it came to be.
Yeah. So I've made rosé exclusively from Grenache since I came to California. So it's been since 2010 at Ojai Vineyard. And I think in Oregon we always made it out of Pinot Noir,
Mhm.
and it was good. It was fine. I always thought of rosé as just being sort of pedestrian and boring, which was silly of me at the time. And I remember coming to Ojai Vineyard, and we had this new block of Grenache at John Sebastiano Vineyard in Santa Rita Hills. And Adam was kind of toying what to do with it, and some of it was slightly overcropped. And we said, hey, let's make some like really good high end rosé out of this. We're gonna full cluster press it. We're gonna barrel ferment it. Just let it do a spontaneous fermentation. Let's see how that goes. And I remember just being floored by how beautiful and aromatic it was, super complex, but has like a really big texture. It's got a lot of tension. And I found that really obviously very fascinating. So when I started making my own wines, I had just sought out Grenache, and I toyed with a few others. I tried some Cabernet and Cabernet Franc. I
Mhm.
think we did a little Malbec one year, but I just kept always going back to Grenache. I just think it's extremely feminine in this expression,
Mhm.
but in a powerful way, and I really enjoyed that. Santa Barbara County is beautiful for Grenache because you can grow it in so many areas. And part of my heritage, my mother is half Asian and half Native American. So
Wow.
I grew up with this kind of Native American history as well. And first, I was friends with Jeff Newton, who runs Coastal Vineyard Care, legend in the Santa Barbara County viticulture. And he was talking to me about Grenache and where I could find it and who grows it well. He said, "Hey, do you know about this indigenous owned vineyard in Santa Barbara?" I was like, "No, no, no." So he called me up there, and actually Adam Tomac was there too, and we went for a drive and checked out the vineyard, and I thought it was absolutely beautiful. Fog was setting still in the morning, 9, 10 a.m., which is awesome to see. You know, those of us who love higher acid wines, that's like
Yeah.
a talking dirty
The,
to me. The
the
vineyard's talking
later the
dirty to
later
me.
the fog, the better. If it's after
Exactly.
10:30, it's a good place.
Exactly. So I was fascinated by the whole thing, the story, the plantings, the viticulture there was incredible. And so I ended up buying some of that. And then after that, just started leasing blocks from them. And this, I think the rosé is extremely expressive. It's one of the most expressive rosés I've ever made. I'm really, really pleased by it. And what we do in the winery is pretty simple. We're kind of trying to do a really traditional homage to Grenache Rosé. We pick the grapes very early in the morning, bring them into our winery. It's kind of a routine that we do for most of our fruit. We put it into our cold chiller. We have a drive-in cold chiller, and we blast everything down to 33 degrees. We get it very, very cold, and that allows us to not use sulfites in the early part of the winemaking process. Because it's cold, it's not going to get too many like weird bacterial activities. Um, we take it out of the cold box and we actually like foot stomp it, clean our feet, hop in the bins, I Love Lucy style. We foot tread all of our bins, and then we let it soak for usually about 12 hours in cold temperatures. So it's usually the next morning that we press. We put it all in whole cluster into our press and gently squeeze it. And then they go into French oak barrels, neutral French oak barrels. I typically use either old Pinot Noir barrels or Chardonnay barrels. The Pinot Noir barrels can give it a little color, of course. I don't do too much, but I think it can add a interesting aromatic profile. And then we barrel ferment it at pretty cold temperatures again for usually the fermentation itself is about a month. And then we get it very cold, usually not much mallow or sometimes no mallow at all. And then it ages for about 9 months to a year, uh, depending on the vintage. We did for this one, we also did a little bit of stainless steel. So I think we did I forgot the exact quantity, but maybe two-thirds of barrel and a third in stainless steel. Just keep that profile really zippy. And yeah, that was it. Bottled it very chilled, unfined, unfiltered, and it's
Yeah.
it's bright and clear.
I was gonna say the clarity on it is remarkable for a wine that's unfined and unfiltered. And I know,
Hmm.
we'll talk more about your natural winemaking style on this. Um, I'm interested by the barrel fermentation on this because that's, anathema to a lot of rosé producers. It's stainless steel, keep that acidity, like don't pull anything away, don't add any color. So why the barrel fermentation on this one?
Yeah, so that's something that I learned from Adam Tolmack, and I'm sure we can talk more in this conversation about why Adam is so important to me. But I think the one of the most important things I learned from Adam, besides experimenting, which we can talk about, was barrels, the use of French barrels. And I think when I showed up there, he was about 60/40,
Mhm.
old wood to new wood. And when I left, he was probably 85/15, um, old to new.
Yeah.
So we kind of really scaled back the new oak use. But we did a lot of side by sides so the experimenting thing was really cool. And we would do things like, say, Chardonnay or Sauvignon Blanc, and we would take, say, like, 1,000 liters and put it into barrel and 1,000 liters and put it into tank and everything else exactly the same, and then taste it for a couple years after that and see what the difference was. And I always found that the the barrel fermented, neutral barrel fermented whites, obviously the reds too, but the whites just had this like really cool texture and really cool complexity that I found lacking in the stainless wines. And the
Hmm.
stainless had precision that
Right.
sometimes the barrels lacked. And maybe a little more focus on aromatic profile in the stainless, but there was this velvety texture that you got from the barrels and this kind of interesting depth to the perfume
Hmm.
that really attracted me. So we kind of in our winery today, we're almost 100% barrel. There's very, very little tank that we use.
All neutral.
All neutral. Never used a single new oak barrel
I
in
think this
doctor's
wine,
orders.
you can tell this wine has a lot of acidity. So there's that nice roundness that the that the thyme and neutral oak has kind of rounded out so that you get balance
Hmm.
between the acidity
Yeah,
and the kind of weight so that it lingers on the palate. It doesn't just disappear like a lot of rosés can do, but it's not too weighty.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Hmm.
No, you can definitely pick up that velvety texture. And what I find interesting is with the amount of, fruitiness that you get on the palate, typically the rosés that have that level of fruitiness don't have the acid to support it. And this one really has that bright acidity and a crispness to it.
Yeah,
Plus the aromatics on this are just so intense in your face. Just almost like cherry blossom and like cherry and strawberry candy. It's
yeah.
it's a fascinating, it's like a Willy Wonka type of rosé. It's kind of my
Yeah.
analogy for it.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think to answer part of that, I think acidity is really, really, really important in wine. And we all know that. Every winemaker will talk about acidity. For me, it's the most important. I will completely disregard what the sugar is and make picking decisions solely based on acid.
Mhm.
So for me, I will pH is everything. If I'm in a vineyard and I'm sampling, I will frequently not even look at the sugars and just look at the progression of pH and pick solely on acid levels. It's important to monitor sugars as well, so you know when it's ripening and when it's not in the sugar sense. And I think also just to make sure there's balance between the acid and the sugars. But for me, the acidity is absolutely the most important. And I will have a wine that's 10% alcohol and balanced with acidity or 16% alcohol, and I'm happy with either. So I'm not one of those people that's just in the hey, everything has to be low alcohol or high alcohol category. It's
Right.
really like it's more about acidity to me, even though our wines do tend to be lower in alcohol.
Nice. No, this is a beautiful rosé. Color is gorgeous. It's just got that like classic bright, bubblegum pink to it. Um,
Yeah.
Beautiful flavors, super juicy, mouth-watering, really delicious. What we always like to ask, what food pairings would you pair with this?
That's a good question.
Yes.
Um, there's a few things I would pair it with. Like the first thing that comes to mind is probably like a Thai chicken satay on a
Hmm.
smoker
Okay.
on a summer day, something like that. Maybe
Yeah.
definitely like uh I love the idea of seafood. So my mind went to oysters. Yeah, you could pair it with oysters, but maybe probably not quite
I
the best
almost
pairing for it.
feel like it's got too much flavor that would
Yeah, I
overpower
feel
the
like it
oyster.
probably is.
Yeah.
Yeah, smoked fish. I think like a summer gazpacho would be amazing
Oh,
with
that would
some
be
fresh herbs.
That'd be interesting. I can see goat cheese being a really nice pairing with this, that sort of sharp,
Absolutely.
slightly salty piquancy. I was trying to imagine like a goat cheese kind of strawberry arugula
Hmm.
salad. The strawberries, oddly enough, kept getting in the way with this wine because you've got so many strawberries in the wine
It's already
itself
there.
that, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
you do kind of
Um,
need a contrast.
but the goat cheese would be phenomenal. Even like yeah, like goat cheese spread on like a sort of really buttery focaccia with some onion and garlic baked
I
into
love
it
that.
would be really
That
nice.
sounds good.
Yeah, yeah. No, beautiful wine. This is a stellar rosé. And I
Thank
know,
you.
you know, a lot of America and, wine experts will sort of not poo-poo rosé, but they think of it as a lesser wine. But I know that rosé is
They
actually one
do.
of the hardest wines to make. So,
It's incredibly difficult. I think it's difficult to have brilliance in color. That's
mhm.
one thing that's very, very hard to do as a winemaker. Rosés frequently tend to brown or they just lose their color and you have a Blanc de Noir
Right.
Meats very easy to overcolor them. The tannins can be really difficult to manage. You can lose delicate aromatics really easily. So I do think it's one of the more difficult ones.
No, well done. Very, very excellent,
Thank you.
rosé. You're welcome. Beautiful. Let's move on. We're going to do the 2023 Saint Ynez Valley Grenache, but the one with the white label there. So you're working for Adam at Ojai Vineyards. You're making wine there. At what point do you decide that it's time to branch out on your own and you need to start doctor's orders?
So I was working for Adam, and I think his experimental methodology was so fascinating to me that I thought I kind of had to spend the rest of my life trying to figure stuff like this out. But I knew he and I had some differences in opinion on how wines ought to be made, and it was also a small place. We got along really well, but I was the highest I would ever get there. I was his assistant winemaker,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
didn't have a boss except for him, and it
You're
was a
never going
very
to be
small
winemaker
place.
there.
No. And I'm a fairly ambitious person. I wanted to, create my own thing. I also really loved art, and I wanted to incorporate art into labels and branding and, be able to pair my own food. I'm also a chef, so be able to pair my own food with wine. So obviously the long-term goals just weren't quite aligned. Although we parted on very, very good terms and we're still good friends. We hang out all the time. Um, I, I I think this was end of 2013. I got a phone call from a gentleman in Ojai named Larry Guerra, who started Topa Mountain Winery,
Hmm.
and he had just started fermenting some stuff, and he was about to start a winery in Ojai. And he realized right away that he had no idea what he was doing and didn't want to ruin his first wine. So he called me and said, "Hey, can you like come consult for me this year?" So I made sure to clear with Adam. Adam was cool with it. So I would kind of pop over there in his little winery in Upper Ojai after working at Ojai Vineyard and kind of help him out, manage fermentations. It's very, very small. I think we probably did 10 barrels that year. And he and I got along well and realized that there was a lot of opportunity there with me. He offered me a full-time job as director of winemaking for a new winery that he wanted to start and just said, do whatever, make some awesome wine, and we'll sell it all in our tasting room. You don't have to worry about sales. You don't have to worry about marketing. Just get nerdy with winemaking.
Yeah.
And I went back and just told Adam right away that I got this job offer. And I was like, hey, I'm really torn. I don't know what to do. I love working with you. I'm not sure that I should do this, but I just want you to know that this is something that's come across my lap. And he said, oh, you should do it. That's you. You should go do that.
Where is the
So
winery?
it was no longer exists, but it was in Ojai.
Oh,
And actually, I took over the winery when he retired. So
Oh,
it sort
okay.
of
Nice.
merged into doctor's orders. But
it was
yeah,
called,
so it
what
was
was the name
called
of
Topa,
Uh,
Topa, Topa Mountain Winery.
sorry to digress. Is there also
No.
now an Ojai Mountain Winery?
Yeah, so that's what we were talking about earlier, the one on the hill,
Okay.
that's really high altitude.
Yeah, I
But
feel
they
like
they don't have
when
a
I
winery there. They're making their wine in Sonoma.
oh, okay, that's the one. Yeah, when I pour at Road Rangers, they're always right next to me because I'm Paso
Oh yeah.
Seco and they're Ojai Mountain, so it's OP. So okay.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That makes sense.
nice.
Got it. Okay,
yeah,
Yeah,
so
well,
so
their winemaker is in Sonoma, which is why, and they don't have the
correct.
permission to build a winery on the mountain yet.
No,
got it.
they
I'm
may
connecting
not ever.
dots.
It's hard to get up there.
Yeah.
And
Perfect.
it'll make you car sick because it's windy.
One of these days, I'm
Yeah.
gonna have to go drive up there just to get car sick. Okay, so Topa Mountain kind of shuts down, and you decide to go over there and sort of take the blank check of make
Yep.
wine. Don't worry about selling it. We'll sell it. You make it.
Yep.
If you make it, they will come. A very Field of Dreams concept.
Yeah, exactly. And so the kind of order was make some cool wine, get nerdy with it, but let's make wine that really fits the basic consumer, but is still
Mm,
high end. And that was an interesting task for me because, of course, I wanted to get really nerdy with things, but then I also realized I had to be able to sell this in a tasting room.
yeah.
And it was just a tasting room, and it was almost, not to knock it, but it was almost like a Temecula tasting room. It was really more
Oh,
about the property and the experience than the wine. It
it's
wasn't
an
like,
event
hey,
center, not a winery.
yeah, it was sort of like, hey, come have a great time, and hey, we happen to have good wine. Whereas everything we do is more like, hey, we have this amazing wine, and we'll try to give you a good time too.
Right, right.
Um, so that really triggered this very careful winemaking style of mine, where I was trying to make stuff that was really crushable and just delicious and easy for people of all walks of life to enjoy. That was still really sophisticated. And I think Doctor's Orders was actually born out of that style, even
Hmm.
though it's influenced out of so many other things. I realized that young people are just thirsty for something that's not what their parents are drinking. They don't want Rombauer. They don't want Napa Cabs. They're not looking
Famous
for,
Silver Oak. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And they just want something different. And I realized that every time I released something different, like, a Urbanic Sangiovese or just something that's off the beaten track a little bit, all the youngsters would flock and it would sell out right away. And one of our best selling wines I ever made at Topa was Sangiovese. And
Hmm.
we would sell like probably 500 cases of that every year in weeks. That was really cool. So I thought, okay, this is
Dom,
this is sort of
what year did you start with Topa?
I was in Topa between 2014 and 2020. I was there for
So even going back
six,
then, I
seven
mean, that's
years.
what people wanted even 2014, 2016. They
Even
wanted
back then.
to. Mhm.
Yeah.
There was an
Yeah, and
interest
then
in forgotten grapes, is what you were saying.
absolutely.
Nice.
And during that time, because I was kind of running the winery and I had an assistant of my own there at that point who was very talented. Um, they gave me the opportunity to just kind of do my thing. So I left Topa a couple times just for a small sabbatical, and I consulted in Australia and then also in New Zealand. And in both those places, I made wines that were very, very classic, and not in a bad way, but their demographic was all boomers.
Yeah.
And I kind of realized, okay, these wines are great. They're great wines. But if I want to reach people that are in my generation, I need to not do that.
Hmm.
So that was kind of what triggered doing these kind of like different, little bit more wild winemaking tactics.
Nice. So you kind of, I guess, 2020, 2021 is when Doctor's Orders sort of first came to fruition.
Yeah, so our very first wine ever made for Doctor's Orders was in 2016.
Okay.
It was never released right away. It wasn't released right away. There's this vineyard in Hope Ranch, which is in Santa Barbara, next to the Santa Barbara airport, that was planted to 2 acres of Chardonnay, and it was on the ocean. Literally stand in the vineyard, throw a rock into the water. Very, very cool. Probably the coldest climate vineyard in California. Never got above 75 during the day, ever,
Wow.
even in the middle of the summer. Never got hot. Very long hang time, very, very long hang time, incredible acidity. So I loved this vineyard, and it came across, and it just wasn't the right vineyard for Topa Mountain Winery. It's just, I knew that if I made that wine, I would have a hard time selling it under that label. So I said, you
Mhm.
know what? Maybe this is the time for me to create a little offshoot label. Talk to the owners of Topa. They were very cool with this. So I said, okay, I'm going to do that. So I bought the grapes, and my idea was to make some kind of, nod to Chablis. I wanted to age the wine for 4 to 5 years in barrel, and then another couple years in bottle prior to release. So that was the concept. So I already had wine in 2020 when we first launched. And then in 2019, I really wanted to hard launch this. So I bought some Malvasia Bianca
Okay.
and from the Miller family at French Camp.
Yep.
And I bought some Grenache from an undisclosed Grenache vineyard, which is coming up next in our tasting from the
Ah.
oldest planting of Grenache in the state.
Hmm.
Um, so those were really cool, and we made this really beautiful wines, those three wines, and then COVID. And we had a whole plan for launching. At that time, we were also making hard cider, and our hard cider was sold in Whole Foods, and we were developing a partnership with Whole Foods. And we said, okay, we're just going to sell this wine at like Whole Foods and maybe a few other places, get some good shelf placements, and
Yeah.
try to bang this out for youngsters. And then COVID hit. So Whole Foods was shut down for any new products, and we had to completely change the way we're
How
going to
many
market ourselves.
how many Grenaches were you going to start with?
I had three wines. I had a Grenache, I had a Malvasia Bianca, and I
Oh,
had a Chardonnay.
oh, okay.
And we even started more simply than that. We called the Chardonnay a Chardonnay, but then the white and the red were just literally white and red. Doctor's orders didn't even tell anyone what the varieties were. Um, so that was the idea. COVID hit, everything got shut down. We're all stuck in our houses, and I was stuck in my winery and trying to figure out what to do. And I realized, hey, I really need to just get this out there to young people. The best way to do that is social media. So I started building an Instagram following and just sold our wine on Instagram. I would create Instagram posts and special offerings and little drops every couple of weeks. And we sold our entire first vintage during 2020 just on Instagram. And, as a rebel, I decided to start using the plague doctor because that's what everyone was
Mhm.
thinking, ominous. We're
Yeah,
all stuck at home. We hate our lives right now. It's dark. So
you're
I
you're
created a
yeah, you're cutting off some of your potential customers, but the ones that know it and see it and love it will flock.
we ended up making it more playful later on, but our first label was pretty dark and ominous looking. It worked. It worked at the time. It still works because we've made it more playful. But
Yeah.
yeah, so that was kind of the concept. We launched it, and it took off, and we just started on that trend. We said, you know what, screw it. Like we don't need to get corporate. I'd much rather hand sell this to people that I know are going to enjoy it. And so to this day, we're not in Whole Foods. We're not in any major chains with doctor's orders. We sell out of our tasting room. We sell to our wine club members and, handful of people like you guys who just enjoy the wine.
Yeah. I I'm trying to remember the first time I ever tasted your wines was the first time you were at the Garage East Festival up in Paso Robles, which
Oh yeah,
I think it was 2021. I think it was the Garage
I think
East,
that's
like
right.
right after COVID. So
I think that's right.
yeah, yeah. But
And
I
you have a
remember, go ahead.
sorry, you have a fun tasting room. I mean, it's funky and
Yes.
energetic and
We do.
sells
Yeah,
everything.
I definitely want to talk more about that and the different fermented products that you make, since that's kind of
Yes.
the overall brand
Yes.
of things. But let's get into this particular wine because this one you have done in a very specific style. This is a um, partially carbonic, macerated, and fermented wine. So why bring Grenache through carbonic? What do you think that brings out in the wine? What did you want to do with it?
Yeah. I'll answer a couple questions with this, as I
Yeah.
know, at some point you're going to ask me why do I love Grenache? One of the reasons I love Grenache is having grown up in the Pacific Northwest, I was fascinated with a wine that was so Pinot Noir that was so delicate, but had so many different expressions and extremely feminine in perfume sometimes, but masculine in body and so many other things. And so I thought, okay, this has got to be the best variety in the world. And then, and when I get older, I come down to work at Ojai Vineyard, and I'm tasting beautiful Syrahs and other varietals. And I remember having this Grenache from John Sebastiano Vineyard. It was the 2010 vintage that I made with Adam Tolmack. I remember tasting it out of barrel and like literally reeling from it and thinking like this is one of the most beautiful things I've ever had. I'm like blown away by this, and it just reminds me of a slightly more masculine Pinot Noir, but it's
Hmm.
still like in its feminine energy, if that makes any sense. And so like that was just like profound to me, and I thought, okay, I gotta like pursue this Grenache thing. This is so cool. Um, and so obviously Pinot Noir, and this is a little long-winded answer for you, but Pinot Noir and um, does really well with carbonic. Obviously, you've got
Right.
goodness, what's the region called?
Yeah, very well, like Beaujolais. I mean, very
Beaujolais.
similar
There we go.
to
My brain stopped for a
Gamay.
second.
They're
But yeah,
very
Gamay and
similar
Pinot
grapes.
Noir are sisters. There's a gene apart, and they're the
Yeah.
same variety, and actually sometimes they'll mutate into each other. So Pinot Noir Gamay are incredible expressions to uh or take really well to full cluster and carbonic fermentation. And I thought, well, why not try that with Grenache? Grenache can be so similar to those varieties. So I tried it one year. I did a 100% carbonic, 100% whole cluster wine. We actually did that at Ojai Vineyard, and I think we sold it by itself in a single bottling. And it was just a little too wild, a little too weird for me. So over the years, I kind of scaled that back and played with it for a while, and I kind of ended up with this, which is partially carbonic, partially whole cluster. It's usually about 20% whole cluster.
Mhm.
And you can taste that in the palate, but it's not cloying and it's not overpowering. And then the carbonic, what kind of makes it partial is that we still do pump overs daily, and then sometimes punch downs at the end. And it's not a fully hermetically sealed vessel that never opens because of the pump overs and punch downs, but it stays sealed otherwise. So unless the vessel's actively being like pumped over or punched down, there's no air of any kind, and the whole vessel's sealed with just like a little air bleed pressure valve.
So how I'm
Can I,
go
sorry,
ahead.
I don't to interrupt, because Patty had messaged me privately to ask what carbonic was as a reminder.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, of course.
so I
And
had already
actually that
explained it to her, but I wanted to just clarify something for Patty when, like I said, carbonic is when they seal and there's no oxygen, all the fermentation happens intercellular with the berry. So when they're taking the lid off and introducing oxygen, that's when you say it's partial, because it's now had the exposure. So I had said to you in Beaujolais, they do carbonic. In Beaujolais, they also do some partial, because they will do pump overs and different things depending on the crew that you're in Beaujolais.
Correct.
and I'm
Yeah. So
fascinated by that idea of like at what point do you decide to sort of take the lid off and do the pump over rather than just trust your instinct with the sealed container to do the
yeah,
full fermentation?
I mean, for me, it came from trial and error.
Okay.
We never like made too many errors, thankfully, but there were a few vintages that we made, in particular back at Ojai Vineyard, where I felt like it was too carbonic, and I think maybe we opened the lid once or twice and did a pump over the 20 days that it was on the skins,
And
and
too
that felt
carbonic
like
meaning got too bubblegummy.
yeah, so it was too bubblegum. It was also, it would get a little bit reductive, like
Mm.
tiny bit of H2S. And I felt like it pulled a lot more flavor out of the stems than I was
Mm.
comfortable with. It was a little more green and bitter. So it was kind of this weird mix of like bubblegum, bitter, and just kind of like little H2S, and just the mix wasn't quite right. So I felt like, okay, this needs some air. Like if
Can a
we
can a
go ahead.
wine ferment carbon? Does it take longer to fully ferment carbonically to ferment to dryness, or can
Um,
it not? Or are there challenges?
No, it frequently doesn't take longer, but it depends on your temperatures. I know a lot of Beaujolais producers will put the grapes in warm in the tank to kick it off right away. Sometimes with the Pied de Cuvée, which is like a little, house yeast slurry. And then they'll seal it up and they'll keep it at like 80 degrees. And then you could ferment in 4 days, 5 days, sometimes less, sometimes more. We did a carbonic in Australia with Syrah that I think we fermented in 48 hours, which is wild.
Wow.
But so it's typically very fast once it goes. Um, but then sometimes, if you're doing cooler temperatures, and especially if you're aerating, it can be a lot longer.
Yeah. Sorry, we're going over what pump over is for Patty over
Oh,
there.
yeah.
Yes, exactly. Basically, pulling out the juice. So when you are fermenting your grapes, when you're going through the maceration, um, the top forms a cap of the skins and all the solids, and then the juice basically hangs underneath that. Think of like a pie crust or a film forming on the top. And so to allow the flavors and the color and the tannins of the skins to reintegrate into the juice, you have to do one of two things. You have to use a tool to actually punch that cap down back into the juice, which is called punching down into it, or you use a pump, electronic pump or electric pump, to basically pull that juice out from the bottom and pump it back over the cap so it reintegrates into the wine, and that's a pump over.
That's right.
Yeah, good. All right.
And then there's all sorts of philosophies and techniques for how long you do a pump over, how fast you do a pump over, how wide the stream is, if you aerate it during the process, if you're doing rack and returns, which is called délestage in French, which is where you splash it into a different tank and then put it back into the original tank. And then there's also pump overs where you're using the big tool that looks like a fancy toilet plunger and you're pushing the grapes around. And I mean, at the end of the day, they all serve the same purpose, but can kind of create different flavors and textures and aromatic profiles during the fermentation.
Yeah.
But obviously, red wines are just simply during the fermentation, you've got juice and you've got skins that are soaking in the same vessel. And the skin is pulling out tannin, aromatic compounds, flavor compounds, esters, all sorts of stuff. And that's what ends up creating the final wine. And so the different ways in which you increase or decrease or change that maceration will have profound impact on the wine.
Yeah, they naturally want to separate. The solids want to
Right.
float to the top, the juice wants to sink to the bottom. So you have to use manual methods to reincorporate them to ensure that you get the color, the flavors, the enzymes, the pyrazines, whatever it might be that you want in that.
Exactly.
So yeah, that's why he's doing the carbonic, where he's sealing it in a tank and allowing the natural fermentation to happen from the inside out. But then he's also doing a pump over top of that to give a little more color, a little more flavor, and body, because as he was saying earlier, he gets too much bitterness from the stems, since he's doing whole cluster carbonic fermentation. He's putting the entire clusters in that sealed container. This allows you to put more of that liquid in to kind of dissipate that bitterness that you get from the stems.
That's right. Yep.
And that the both whole cluster with stems, right? Are you
Yes.
de-stemming or whole cluster with stems?
Whole cluster means with stems.
Right. So
in my world, yeah.
So like I had messaged Patty and David before. I find that a lot of carbonic wines, people always talk about them as being chewing gum like. I find them always to have the savory note, and I think it's what you had said, where you get that kind of green bitter because of the stem. So whole cluster and carbonic combined is going to lead to
yes,
savory note, which I think this wine has without being overpowering.
Yeah,
absolutely. You're right.
No, it's a fun wine, and obviously that we'll call it a semi-carbonic maceration on this one.
There we go.
Gives it a lighter body. You bring out more of the acidity, but it's not as dense and rich as your other Grenaches that you have here. You still get those beautiful, cherry and kind of a little bit of a meaty flavor to it, but it's still light and lively and, very, very bouncy wine.
Yes, that's a great descriptor.
Yeah. And one that definitely wants a chill. So I imagine, really nice picnic wine. To me, this feels like a like a burger wine. Like, this needs some just grilled red meat, like,
agreed,
some sort of a carbonic reaction on the grill to give you that charred note.
100%. No, I think this, a little chill summer day and a smash burger, is a match made in heaven.
Yeah, absolutely. I could definitely see that. Yeah. But a beautiful wine, and again, an interesting example of how the decisions that a winemaker makes can vastly affect the makeup, the flavors, the aromatics of a wine. It seems like with it carbonic, it's a binary. It's a yes or no. Oh no, he's there. All right. You suddenly jumped from the top to the bottom of my
oh, sorry. There we
That's
go.
okay. It's not your fault. But with carbonic, yeah, it seems like it's binary. It's either, we're going full carbonic or we're not doing any carbonic at all. So it's interesting to have a winemaker who's experimenting with bringing in the carbonic, but also doing the pump over to allow more of the more traditional flavors to shine through.
Certainly.
Nice.
I've heard of a combination. I don't know doing it the way you do. I've heard of people doing some native ferments and stuff in conjunction with carbonic, or start carbonic and finish, but not necessarily the carbonic with pump overs in between.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we'll get into whether the others are done with carbonic, but as far as I know, this is the only carbonic wine that he's making. Everything else is traditional, either punch down or pump over, but Dom will correct us on those. And that's a perfect seg to move into One of our most interesting wines that you've got, not that any of your wines are not interesting, because they're all interesting, but this one with the super dark, nearly unreadable label on it, which I love. And probably our best view of the Plague Doctor right there
There you go.
on the cover. So this is your very limited 2023 Grenache bottling from the oldest Grenache plantings, not just in Santa Barbara County, but all of California. And for those of you that were with us in October, that may ring a bell because we featured Stoltman Vineyards on our featured winery of the month in October. And they actually own this particular vineyard. This is from the Stoltman Vineyards, which were the first ever plantings of Grenache in Ballard Canyon and in California, which is kind of stunning. But how did you come upon this vineyard, Dom? How did you decide? Was this a vineyard that you had targeted and said, like, I really, really, my obsession with Grenache is such that I have to go back to the origin and source grapes from this vineyard? Or was it kind of a set of circumstances that led you to this particular vineyard?
No, it's a great question. The answer is yes and both
Okay.
and.
Oh, very improv.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I can't talk about the vineyard itself publicly is that there's a little bit of a backdoor deal going on here. So
Okay. Yeah.
it was originally offered to me. It was offered to me at extremely expensive price. And
Right.
at the time, I was working with Biennacido Vineyard. The Miller family is very good, close family friends of ours. So
And
I was
I should
working with,
say that Ynez is also well known for
yes,
cutting very similar deals where I have had some wines from Ynez fruit where the winemaker was not allowed to disclose that it was a Ynez wine.
yeah. And actually, my contracts with Biennacido is just public knowledge. They have an equation that you have to work out where if you spend, and I forget right now what it is, but there's basically the bottle price can't be less than a specified percentage of your tonnage price in the
Hmm.
vineyard,
Hmm.
which typically worked out to something around, it wasn't exact, but if you were spending around 7,000 a ton, your bottle had to be $70.
Oh,
It
wow.
wasn't exact, but it was very close to that. So, Biennacido is very expensive, and it's an extremely beautiful vineyard, and the Miller family does a wonderful job growing it. And I worked with this at Topin Mountain Winery, and we made $100 wines from it, and it was great. It didn't fit the doctor's orders profile because everything we're doing is under $40, and
Hmm.
we're really trying to make like really, really crushable high-end everyday wine for the discerning palate and for youngsters and really get youngsters more into wine. And obviously the first way to do that is to not spend $7,000 a ton on grapes. We had to get kind of creative with stuff. And that was one of the reasons that led us to start farming our own vineyards because it was a lot cheaper for us to farm our own vineyards. And we farm everything organically, which is surprisingly even cheaper. So those things allowed us to pass on those savings to the consumer and still be able to not go bankrupt. So when this particular plot of land was offered to me, it was incredibly expensive, kind of Napa Valley expensive. And I just said like, I'd love to, and I'm really humbled by the offer, but it just not doesn't fit our program. There's no way I can make this wine and not charge $100 a bottle. So I'm going to have to decline. And so we kind of parted and went our own ways. And maybe 6 months later, they called and they said, "Hey, well, one of the guys who's contracted here is trying to back out of some of this fruit. How about we just give it to you for whatever price you want to buy it for, and just don't. You can say it's from the AVA, you can say it's from the region, you can say it's the oldest planting, but I don't want it. I don't want to hear anywhere in public that it's from my vineyard." So I said, "Okay, that's not a problem." So here we are.
So knowing that it's the oldest vineyard of Grenache, are we as consumers and enthusiasts allowed to say it? A deduction, or is it best just to say the oldest vineyard of?
I think it's best to just say oldest vineyard and let people figure it out themselves, but you probably won't get me into too much trouble if you say it. I'm a big boy. I can handle it. But this wine's very cool. So we did an extended aging. We did 18 months neutral French oak. These are in old Grenache barrels from the Saint Winery. For one of their main wines. So it very, very high end wines. Sorry, very high end barrels that came to us, but they were 5 years old, so they're considered neutral. Um, the the grapes were mostly destemmed. There's a little bit of whole cluster. I believe it's around 15% or maybe slightly less, and not really carbonic. You were asking earlier about how many wines were carbonic and not. All of my reds have some touch of it because
Mhm.
we do have ways to seal all of our vessels. So quite often they're sealed for the first little bit to avoid any kind of contamination of yeast in the fermentation. But then as they warm up, those lids come off and we do more punch downs or pump overs. So this wine is definitely not carbonic in the way that the previous Grenache was, but there's always a little touch of them in my wines, which I think leads to some of those more powerful aromatic um, compounds that you'll get in the aromas of our wine.
Nice. I wanted to ask you, at what point in your journey into winemaking did you decide to kind of move on to the natural side of things, doing
Yeah.
native ferments, native yeasts, very little inoculation, that kind of stuff.
So I was actually, and I think this, maybe provokes a conversation about what natural wine is. Natural wine obviously doesn't actually have a definition legally.
Right.
The TTB does have a category on it, and some like you can't be adding mega purple, for example, or like color agents to your wine and call it natural. But other than that, there's no specification of any kind. You can add as much sulfur as you want. You can add any kind of yeast that you want. It could be very conventionally farmed. You could be using Roundup all over the place.
Mm,
You can be adding tannins to your wine. You can be adding all
yes.
sorts of stuff. So there's really no definition of it. And because of that, I feel like a lot of people just run with it in different directions, and that always kind of bothered me. So if you had asked me in 2010 to 2012 what I thought about natural wine, I would have said it's a BS movement, and I hope it dies. Which is kind of funny that here I
Yes.
am, not long later, calling
At
our
the
winery a natural
forefront,
winery.
at the barricades, holding the banners
Exactly.
up.
That so I changed over time. I think I realized first of all that at Ojai Vineyard I was making natural wine. Ojai Vineyard doesn't call itself natural wine, but they're mostly uninoculated. They are rarely filtering their wines. Almost all of their vineyards are organic in practice. They're not all certified, whereas mine are all certified for the most part now. But they had the sustainability level was high. They did very little for additions. The sulfur was always low, and I realized like that's kind of natural wine, right? And I started looking at what other natural producers were doing, and frequently they were adding more to their wines than we were at Ojai Vineyard. And so I realized like, okay, well, there's no definition. So like maybe we should like think about what a real definition should be. And then I started looking at what makes a wine organic in France. Obviously, to have organic wine here in the US, there can't be any added sulfites of any kind, which
Right.
limits that category quite a bit. But in Europe, I forget the physical number. I want to say it's 50 parts per million of total SO2, but it might be 60 or 70, but it's still fairly low amount of sulfur. But you can add that and have a certified organic wine. And so I thought, okay, well that maybe is a good and prudent starting point for considering something natural. Um, and so then I thought, okay, so I'm already doing either no yeast or low yeast. I'm making most of my own Pied de cuvées or yeast cultures. I'm using naturally isolated yeast. I'm not adding coloring. I'm not adding tannins. I'm not fining with egg whites. I'm not using pig gelatin.
Hmm.
I'm already sourcing from organic vineyards because I just believe in that. I live a
And by the
natural
way, everything
lifestyle.
he's talking about is legal in wine. They're not
Sure.
Yes.
natural, but they're not illegal.
Well, they're not only legal, but they're in most wines. Like if you
Yeah.
go to Trader Joe's, like 99 out of 100 of them will have that. Either all
Yeah.
of those things or most of those things.
It's why
And
if you
I've
are a vegan wine, you have to go through a rigorous process to declare yourself a vegan wine. But every
yes,
other wine, even though most people think, how can a wine not be vegan? It's just fermented grapes. But you're right. Horse
most of them are not vegan.
cartilage. There's isinglass, which is sturgeon fish bladder powder. There's all sorts of
Yep.
crazy stuff in there.
Refining. It's not in the wine, it finds the
No,
wine.
it's
Just
fines, but it comes in
for people
contact
who are
with it. Yes.
concerned of what that means, it's not like they're putting animal parts in the wine and letting it
Well, they kind of are.
macerate.
They sort of are.
They kind of are though. Like this is an interesting thing. And this really tripped me out actually when I first started working at, I don't name the winery, but there's a winery that I worked at where we used isinglass and pig gelatin. So those are two
Okay.
things we use for fining. And isinglass, you would make it's as Chris mentioned, it's powdered sturgeon bladder, and it has a really high positive charge, so it can fine out negative ions. And you would mix it up with cold water. You'd let it sit for a few hours. It would smell like rotting fish.
Yep.
You would start a mixer in your tank, so the tank is mixing, and then you would pour it over the top and let the whole thing sit for about 2 weeks. So it's sitting in there for a long time. There's a lot of contact. And then we would kind of siphon the wine off of it after it's settled out, and you would put it in another tank. And when I went to open the tank to clean the original one that had the sediment in it, I almost yacked. I remember sticking my head in there and just thinking like, "Oh my God, this is the most disgusting thing I've ever smelled in my life. This is like worse than being on a dock when all the fishermen come in." It was so disgusting. And so that triggered me. I was like, "Well, I'm not vegan, but like, what the hell? What if I was? Like, this
Right.
wine just sat on fish bladder for 2 weeks, and we're not going to filter it, by the way. So there's for sure fish particulate in there. It might be microscopic at this point, but there is for sure stuff in there still.
Mhm.
And then, unless you're sterile filtering it, the pore levels are pretty big. So you're drinking fish. You might be really small, but you're still drinking fish. And the same thing with the pig gelatin. We would use pig gelatin to fine it. It fines very well. It's extremely effective for fining. Um, and you throw it in, and it would smell a little bit like chicharron at the end of the tank, which is wild. And the same thing, I was just disgusted by this. So I thought, okay, like when I make wine, and I wasn't even thinking about natural wine in the sense of the category. I was just thinking like I love nature. I want to eat organic food. I want to see where my food comes from. If I'm going to eat meat, I want to know where it comes from. I'm not buying my meat from, some hole in the wall. I really cared a lot about good quality and
Right.
non-corporate food, non-corporate winemaking is so important to me. And so I just like I instinctively avoided all of those things as I started making my own wine. And then I just realized like I am making natural wine. That's what this is. And maybe other people make some weird version of this that's funky or weird, or they do use some additives, but like what I'm doing is natural. So I'm just gonna own it and say this is natural wine.
Yeah, I think it's really, it's an interesting thing because I think, unfortunately, those who led the natural wine movement did a disservice because
Yes,
now that the pendulum swung and we can have wines that are maybe they're funky or different or not what you're used to or they're not as big, but they're balanced and they're not incorrect wines. Um,
absolutely.
but now when you say like, oh, I love these natural wines, like I hate saying the word natural because all I think about is the old movement, the original movement that let faulted wines get into that mix that really ruined the
Absolutely.
category. And
Yes.
so, it's there are so many delicious, beautiful, natural wines where it's because it really starts in the farm. You know that. I mean, the minute you're buying fruit from someone that sprays herbicides, what does it matter what you do afterwards? You already put
100%.
herbicides in there.
Yeah.
It's got to
And
start
so
in the.
I agree. And I think the natural wine term, I still have some trouble with it in a lot of ways. And I don't want people to think of it as a different type of wine ever.
Right.
And so just like you mentioned, Allison, like I don't want the word natural still does trigger me a tiny bit. I really don't want to have people think that there's a difference between the way I make wine and the way Adam Tomac makes wine or my dad makes wine. That's categorical.
Mhm.
Really, all I'm trying to say is I'm making a public statement that I don't put shit in my wine. Like if you're drinking my wine, there's nothing. It's just grapes and a lot of care and a lot of time and a lot of energy. Like that's all it is. My ingredients are organic grapes. That's it. So
And
it's really
so,
not, it's yeah,
and how do
go
you
ahead.
feel about sulfur? Like a little sulfur is not the end all be end of the world.
No, I think a little sulfur is essential sometimes, not always, but frequently. I did a lot of experiments with sulfur right when we started this company, and actually with Adam Tomac as well, where we would do make a wine that was completely sulfur free and a wine that wasn't, and there was no other differences between them. And sometimes the wine without sulfites would be much better, and sometimes the wine with sulfites would be much better. And we're always adding small amounts. So as I studied this a bit, I realized kind of a few things. One of them is that in Europe, you can make a wine that's organic that still has 50 parts per million of sulfur. And that's actually like pretty high. I mean, compared to what I do, it's still high.
Mhm.
I don't have a single wine that has 50 parts per million of sulfur in. So everything I do would be legally organic in France. Second thing is that, a lot of the reason that people hate sulfites is um, histamines. They're
Right.
kind of miscategorizing things. So they're saying,
Yeah.
I get headaches, therefore sulfites are bad. And that's not really true. It's usually histamines, usually malnourished fermentations. It's other things. You've got bacteria or microbes growing because you didn't filter your wine. You can actually get a lot worse headaches from natural wine than conventional wine because of that. So usually they are higher in histamines. And
Mhm.
we're very, very careful about that. We actually test for histamines in our winery prior to bottling.
And
So,
most people who are allergic to sulfites know, because sulfites,
yes,
there are more sulfites in a glass of orange juice than a bottle of commercial wine. There are more
yes,
sulfites in your ketchup, your soy sauce, your dried fruit, your beef
absolutely.
jerky. Like if you're eating
Dried
any of those
fruits.
things,
Yeah.
then sulfites are not your problem.
Yep,
Alcohol, histamines, other things can be your problem.
absolutely. So,
Alcohol is
yeah,
never a problem.
yeah. But having considered all that and just seeing that it can be a very useful and good tool and it's in fact an organic compound. And the Egyptians were using sulfites in wine literally two and a half
Mhm.
thousand years ago. They're rubbing sulfur rocks on their tanks, their rock tanks. So, this is like one of the oldest traditions in winemaking is using sulfites for preservation. And it's a very natural method. It just needs to be
Yeah.
used with care, and it can really tarnish a wine if you over add. But I think it can also make a wine either high in histamines or just not very flawed if you don't use it, because it's a very, very effective antioxidant and antimicrobial.
Do you
Yeah, the
think
main reason
better?
why I was just gonna say the main reason why sulfites are used is for shelf life of the wine. If you have, you're producing a lot of wines, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of cases, you may add lots of sulfites because those are going to sit in a warehouse for a long period of time. So they remain fresh until they get out into the stores and can be sold.
Yeah, but
Mhm.
but it's not just that. I mean, you have to remember, first of all, to answer your question, histamines are natural. They come from the sun.
Yeah.
So sunnier areas, higher histamines. But I don't necessarily agree with that. Yes, if you're commercial and you're going to sit on a shelf for 2 years, you do. But unless you're literally selling out of your cellar door and you say after 3 months we don't sell this anymore, or whatever you control, any wine that's going to a restaurant, a store, anything, even if it's only a couple months, you need to make sure it's going to be solid when you open it. And when Trader Joe's years ago started having organic, sulfite-free wines, by the time they were open, they were all bad. They were funky and off and
Yep.
corked and not corked, but they were terrible. And it gave a bad name to organic wine because of that. But I mean, you need sulfites if you want your wine to last, leaving your cellar door and going somewhere else.
Yeah.
You don't know when someone's going to open.
Right.
Sulfites are not the enemy, is the fact that is what we're talking about here.
Exactly.
Do you prefer a term like no intervention, low intervention, minimal intervention,
Yeah,
or does
what
that
do
not
you like?
really work?
Raw wine? Like where do
I
you
don't like raw wine.
okay.
I'll say that. I mean, I guess the term is fine. It doesn't bother me, but in general, the raw wine movement means you never add anything.
Mhm.
In fact, I was banned from being part of raw wine because I add stuff to my wines. But
Dare you?
I know.
Damn you,
There's
rebel.
the big raw wine convention, and I
Raw
think it's cool
wine,
and they make some cool wines. But
and the rare wine movement, they have a big event every year, all over the country, all over the world. They really control how much sulfur is allowed in a wine. So, I mean, they're at fault for letting a lot of those funky natural wines become
yep,
popular.
Yeah.
They
yep.
justified them.
They're the root of the problem, basically.
Yeah. I mean, so honestly, I think that terms like low intervention and natural should go away. And the TTB should allow the use of sulfites in organic wines, and then we should just call our wines organic.
Mm,
I think that's a really simple way to do it because everyone kind of understands what organic means.
yeah.
It means that XYZ compounds are not allowed in the farming, and it means that you're not using certain preservatives and you're not using um, artificial coloring, and you're not using various other things. And most people know what that means. If you go buy organic chicken or you're going to go buy, organic vegetables, you know what you're getting. And so I think it's just going to be more known to people if we use that term, and it's already
Yeah.
used in Europe, and we have a legal precedent from the Europeans on that. So I feel like we should be doing that. But
Yeah, but one thing to
unfortunately, I don't make the
remember is
rules.
that in Europe, they have banned glyphosate. And in
Correct.
America, they have not banned glyphosate, Roundup.
Inorganic. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if someone says they farm organically or certified organic by Dynamic Regenerative, you know they are not using it. If they don't, they probably spray once a year, and they're spraying that cancer-causing crap into the vineyard.
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course, as a winemaker, a friend of mine in France explained, like part of the problem is you can have your vineyards go through the, 3-year BO process to be completely organic there. But if your neighbor is spraying Roundup and it's leaching into your soils, there's nothing you can do about it. You're kind of stuck
You're
with the
kind of screwed.
situation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
I've done the organic process in a few of my vineyards, and they do a 3-year trial.
Mhm.
So they'll come out usually 2 or 3 times for 3 years straight, and they'll test the soil for glyphosate and many, many other residues.
Right.
And if you test positive in your soil, regardless of who's around you, for it during those 3 years, they will not certify you.
And
So in
that's
general,
that's what he was kind of pointing out, which is
Yeah,
that
but
yeah,
you can go through all the motions to make your soil as healthy as possible, but if your neighbor is spraying and leaching into you, you're
right, then you
screwed.
won't be
that
certified.
sounds like
Yeah,
that sounds like a perfect excuse justifying why you don't try to farm the most responsibly as you can. You can't.
yeah,
I can have a non-smoking house. I can have my neighbor smoking next door. Does it affect me? Possibly. But is my place as bad as theirs? No. So yes, herbicides are bad. And if you don't want them in your vineyard, if you can't get certified because the board comes in and finds it, that should concern you. But using that as an excuse is just laziness, and it's selfish because it's a money saving thing. People think,
I mean, it's not an excuse, it's a fact of life, which is that, if you are unfortunately with the tightness of vineyards there, if you are stuck with a neighbor who is not adhering to the way you are producing your grapes, like you can continue to produce that, but you're not going to receive the certification that you would like to allow people to know that you are,
so
producing in an organic or a BO
in
or
your
a certified manner.
in your experience, if you're right next to another vineyard, obviously it'll depend if you're on a slope and winds, but if you're side by side to a vineyard that's not as responsible in their farming, is it truly detrimental to yours, or not as detrimental as it might sound?
no, it's usually not. The places where you get a lot of runoff. I mean, I think in California, we're fortunate that we have good environmental health standards here, and a lot of oversight. Like sometimes too much oversight, but it's good. It's good
Yeah.
for those who are doing conventional farming. I have seen it before. The only time I've seen it is where the vineyard is right next to a very, very large commercial vineyard. Like we're
Mhm.
talking like 10,000 acres.
Yeah.
And it's such a big vineyard that they're using overhead spray. So it's usually the helicopters or aircraft. They're doing the spraying. And at that point, runoff is very, very common. The other area where you can get runoff easily is if they're spraying by hand or machine in the rows, and then you get a freak rain or wind during that time. They're not allowed to spray within 3 days of a projected wind or rain event, but it's California, and sometimes that stuff creeps up on you. So that does happen sometimes, and then you will get runoff. But I have a number of vineyards that are right next to conventional vineyards in Santa Barbara County, and I've never had any testing issues there.
Nice.
Yeah.
Allison, when we were in Sonoma this past summer, there was the winery in southern Sonoma that had all the statuary in it. Do you remember
Done.
that one? And
Yeah.
they took us up to a section of their vineyards where their neighbors basically were not doing the organic stuff and they were. And that was a
Right.
good
But they're
example of that.
certified organic or biodynamic, and they were showing us the difference in the quality of the soils, but they're not challenged to be certified because of their neighbor. They just
Right.
have better soil than their neighbor.
Yes, but they could not do the organic certification because of their neighbor and the
No,
proximity
they're
there.
certified. They're like biodynamic or
Oh, were
regenerative.
they?
Yeah.
Well, the bioregenerative is different than the organic.
No, to be regenerative, organic is the first step.
Okay.
And to be biodynamic, organic is the first step. You cannot be regenerative certified if you're not organically certified.
All right. Fair enough. There you go. Let's talk a little bit about food pairings with this particular wine. That's a natural segue right there.
That is.
This one, it's fascinating. When I opened this up, it had like a lot of fruitiness to it, almost like a high level of like sweet fruit to it. But as it is aged in the bottle, as it's opened up and the oxygen has gotten to it, it's dried up a little bit. But like to me, this wants um it wants something with like that, like a Chinese five spice. It needs that, like there's a little bit of sweetness to it that I could see with kind of a mole. Yeah, mole negro would be fantastic, Eric. Absolutely. I think that's a great pairing with this.
Yeah, mole is great. Duck would be great. Love five spice. That's a good one.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a meat eater, so I feel like a juicy, delicious, medium rare ribeye that's done on oak would be incredible. Um,
I
yeah,
think
then
I I get where you kind of pull in kind of a sweetness, but I get a lot of dark fruit and almost this kind of it's not earthy, but it's not quite savory. Maybe it's more earthy than savory, but there's something really dark and brooding without being heavy. It's weird because
Yeah.
it's not a heavy wine in the least, but it has there's a lift to it, but also with this, I don't know how to explain it. There's like kind of this weight with this lift. It's like
It needs, you know
yeah,
what it needs?
visual
Like
that I'm thinking of.
as I'm sniffing it, like the flavors that are immediately coming to mind are like Moroccan tagine, like that, like
ooh,
little bit of
love that.
cinnamon, a little bit of nutmeg. But you're right about those darker flavors, Allison. Like there's some, it's not a raisiny wine, but you can get some sort of essence of raisin on it. That kind of drier, earthier note to it.
I
So
think
that's
that,
why.
and that sweetness you get is more of that kind of savory spice, that
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 might be it.
cinnamon,
Yeah.
cardamom, kind of five spices as Eric recommended,
Yeah.
or no, you recommended mole, but Chris said five spices. So
Yeah. Jody, I think mushroom risotto would be great with this because it's so earthy, salty, like creamy, and then this has a little bit of that acidity, that darker, drier fruit note. It's almost like a fig component to this, which I find interesting. So
Mhm.
shiitake.
yes, we did a shiitake penne last night, which would have gone phenomenal with this.
I recently made a jerk shiitake that I smoked. It's like
Mm,
actually it was oyster mushrooms, not shiitake, but big oyster mushrooms. Marinated them in jerk sauce and then smoked them on my smoker for a while until they were kind of dry and crunchy. And I feel like for some reason that reminded me of this like spicy, crunchy, nutty. And I think that for the next wine would be a very perfect pairing.
nice. So I have to ask where, you say you're a chef, like where did you get your culinary skills from?
Well, I grew up just cooking farm to table. My dad is a good chef. He grew up also cooking farm to table in Belfast, Ireland. Um, I had a big farm, and we raised all of our own meats when I was young. We had turkeys, ducks, chickens, quail, pheasant. We had a few pigs, we had some cattle, and a lot of sheep. So we had, most of the staple meats in our household. And my mom was not a cook, and my dad was gone a lot. And as a kid, I was kind of obsessed with flavor, and I realized like if I want to eat well tonight, I'm gonna have to cook it myself. Not to knock my
Sorry,
mom,
your
but
mom was Asian and Native American, and she was not a good
yes.
cook.
Not really, no. I learned all of the Asian cooking techniques from my grandmother, my mom's mom, who was 100% Filipino.
Hmm.
But my mom would make spaghetti. That was about it. Yeah,
Do you still
pretty
enjoy a good
unfortunate.
balut every now and then?
Yeah. And my mom loved food. She just didn't like cooking.
Nice.
Yeah. So I grew up cooking, really loved food. And, when I came to Southern California, you can literally go to a farmer's market once a week, all year round. So I realized that this was like the absolute haven for a farm to table type of chef. And that's what I do. So I'm not incredibly sophisticated or, scientific about the way I cook, but I really love really starting with the ingredients as we do
Those
with
are,
wine.
yeah,
So
that's
I'm curious. I'm curious. Um, Back to when we started, and Chris mentioned that your father, I mean, big known winery in Oregon. You got your start there. 3,000 acres of vineyards, 12 brands, I think you said. Clearly
Yeah.
not farming necessarily and making wine the way you do. So what's dinner at the family table like when you discuss wine and when you share wines with each other?
Our winemaking styles are not as far off as you might think. He's definitely a much bigger brand, but at the core, we have very similar principles. We love
mhm.
clean wine. It's the first thing, and I think that's something he taught me. That's something I learned from him and no one else. Is that wines first and foremost should be without flaws, without the standard flaws. I despise Brettanomyces. I don't like H2S. I really like cabbage. I hate cabbage smell in wine. So really, really careful about that in our winemaking. That definitely comes from the influence of my family. My dad is very, very sophisticated with flavor, and everything he does is a little more classic in his winemaking style, but very focused on pairings and focused on food. He's European, so it's all like kind of food and wine pairings. And his wines are lower in alcohol, so even though he's made in a kind of classic style, very frequently you'll see Pinot Noirs that are 10.9%. You'll see Syrahs that are 13%. So it's a little bit all over the place, but in general, his style is more classic, but not that different from ours categorically. And that's what I kind of like to say. I just don't like it when people think that natural wine has to be categorically different than conventional wine, because at the end of the day, the way we make our wines is somewhat similar. He's a little more commercial, but he's also not adding stuff to his wine. He will add yeast, but sulfites is probably pretty similar to what I'm doing, if not less sometimes. And then, he's definitely not adding coloring. He's not using fining agents. He is filtering, but there's no fining agents. And all of his vineyards are organic. So there's actually like a lot of similarities to what I'm doing, even though there's a classic kind of bend to what he's doing and a non-classic to what I'm doing. The wines are still kind of very expressive in similar ways.
That's great. I mean, that's
Yeah,
really, it does show how connected they are. So
yeah, yeah.
Patty and David want to know how well these wines will age because they're younger now.
They're young. Yeah. So, I think they'll age very well. That's something that's really important to us. And we typically age wines for a little bit before releasing, which is why, out in the market, you'll see 2024 wines everywhere. But, we're still drinking 22s and 23s here for doctor's orders. Um, we're really, as we just talked about, I'm really, really focused on making clean wines. We don't have bacterial problems. We don't have fungal problems. You're not going to see our wines re-fermenting in the bottle. You're not going to open 12 bottles in a row and they all taste different. We have a lot of consistency and our winery is very, very clean. Because of that, our wines age just as well as most commercial wines. In fact, sometimes better because there's more grit and texture in our wines, which will help it age better. There's more tannin. So, our winery is young. I don't have any wines that are 10 years old yet, but we're getting close to that and nothing has shown signs yet of failing.
I know Chris stepped away and we'll be back in a sec, but we might as well open up the fourth wine. which
Yeah.
has a lot of sediment up there on that cork.
Yes. This is one wine that probably could have benefited from a little more settling, but we didn't. And what it is actually a little bit of tannin and color pigment that's sticking to the bottle. So there's not a ton of like physical sediment, but it's just stuff that's like stuck to the glass, which is kind of unsightly, but I don't really care. It doesn't change the flavor of the wine.
Hungry later, you just, you kind of eat it.
That's it. That's it.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about this one? Because this is it a 50-50 blend, Syrah?
This is a 50-50 blend of Syrah and Grenache. It comes from Toro Canyon, which is between Montecito and Santa Barbara, on a south-facing hillside slope, very close to the ocean, just a couple miles from the ocean. So tends to be cooler climate, which is why I think you get a little more of that inky Syrah
And you said
aromatic
between
profile.
Montecito and
Santa Barbara.
Santa Barbara. Okay, so going that way. Okay.
Yeah. And I find the wine has a very peppery kind of northern Rhone feel to it. You can tell that it's cooler climate Syrah. You can tell it's cooler climate Grenache. The Grenache is a little more like green tea and kind of herbal. The Syrah is a lot more peppery and kind of meaty. And that combination together, I find very, very fascinating. It's flavor profiles that you don't get all the time in Syrah and Grenache combined.
Are they co-fermented or?
They're co-fermented. So they were married in the vineyard. We picked them into the same bins and put them right into our vats in the winery. And there's also some whole cluster in here. I forget off the top of my head how much, but I want to say it's like 20%. There's a decent amount of whole cluster in here.
It's a really pretty nose.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find my notes here.
And is that whole cluster of each of them, or is that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it was each.
But that peppery really comes through. It's got.
Yes.
Yeah, it is hard to find that level of pepper on a California Syrah, because I feel like that's a cool weather designation to get more of that bacon, that pepper, that smoke kind of note to it.
Agreed. So I think that's, going back to regionality and what makes us different. That's part of the beauty of our Southern California region from Ojai to Santa Barbara, is that you have a massive range of expression, particularly in Rhone varietals like Syrah and Grenache, which can grow pretty much anywhere in the county. But the profile is going to change. The expression is going to change pretty dramatically. If you're growing Grenache or Syrah in Upper Ojai, for example, it's fairly hot. And then if you're growing here, it's very cool in Santa Barbara. And if you're growing on the west side of the Santa Ynez Valley, you're in Santa Rita Hills, and that's very cold climate. They tend to be really peppery wines. Sebastiano Vineyard comes to mind there.
Yeah.
Faceiega Vineyard as well. But then, you can go east, you can go into Santa Ynez, they get a lot warmer. Ballard Canyon is kind of right in between. And then you go north, you can get into Santa Maria Valley, where if you're on the valley floor, like Solomon Hills Vineyard, they can be really, really peppery and inky. And then you go into Villanueva, you get up the hill a little bit. It can be a little less peppery, but it still has that kind of leathery tobacco profile that you get with cooler climate Syrah. So I think there's just it's really cool that you can take this one grape and go pretty much anywhere with a 15-mile radius and have a completely different expression of it.
Yeah.
The wine is it's got that black pepper with blackberry. It's like this pepper, lovely kind of. Really?
Yeah.
And that to me is and I'm sure you'll agree with this. It's one of the things that's always interested me about Grenache is you can find these incredibly light, carbonic style, like strawberries and cream, just super light, high acid versions of it. And then you get into the deeper, like Spanish, earthy, rich, like, just intense, almost like Carignan-esque type of Grenache. It's I think the only grape that maybe even Cabernet, I was going to say, doesn't have the breadth of differences that Grenache does, I feel like.
I agree. Yeah, it's a really fascinating grape variety that has so many different dimensions and layers to it, especially depending on how you treat it or where you grow it.
It has a really nice kind of this textured acidity. I mean, the tannins and the acidity are really well integrated with each other.
Mhm.
I don't know if Rigo's watching sports or clapping at me, but
He's watching the Rams Seahawks game, I suspect. So yeah.
But as to what I was saying, no, I think that it's really nice on the palate too, because it kind of takes pieces of each of the other wines, and it's a nice complete wine. It's again,
right.
it's got these darker notes, but it's got this lift to it. So, these aren't heavy wine. What is this? Yeah. Is it 13.8% alcohol?
13.8, yep.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just nice balance, good fruit, good acidity, good texture. Quite tasty.
And why did you decide to co-ferment this with Syrah? I mean, obviously we talked a little bit about kind of your interest in Syrah, and at the beginning, two Syrah wines were or I guess one of the Syrah wines, Burgundy was the other, was one of the most interesting wines that you
Yeah.
ever tasted. Is that but is Syrah kind of up there with Grenache in terms of another grape that you're obsessed with,
It
or
is
is
for
it
me.
just
I love Syrah. I'm very fascinated by it. I think I prefer Grenache in a few ways, but that's not to diminish my love of Syrah or fascination with it. And I do make some single bottlings of the Grenache variety, or sorry, of the Syrah variety.
Mhm.
And I think in this vineyard in particular, it's so cool climate that the Grenache was a little bit too kind of herbal. It was very, I think we mentioned earlier, very green tea, very bitter, not super fruity, not super giving, but it had this beautiful kind of licorice and leathery texture when I made the wine by itself previously. And so when I came to it, this vintage, I thought I just feel like it could really benefit from another dimension added to it. And the Syrah, I felt similarly. I thought it was really peppery, it was really inky, but it was so light, it didn't have a ton of texture. And so the two of them together, I felt like just really made a cohesive wine.
Yeah, it's beautiful, and I have to show if you
Yeah,
can
we were
see
talking
it.
about that earlier.
Yeah, the sediment on the cork that's
Yeah,
gathered there.
It's for dessert later.
Exactly. It's
that's
it's the
right.
opposite of wine diamonds,
That's how you know it's natural wine.
except you don't make natural wine.
That's right.
Yeah. Nice. No,
Yeah,
this wine is
but
fascinating.
the wine
What? Go ahead.
unfiltered, unfiltered
The
and
wine is unfiltered.
unfiltered.
Almost all my wines. It's very rare that I'll filter a wine.
Yeah, but I mean, the result of this is because of that, right? Like,
No, because the rosé, for example, is unfiltered and it's
It's
completely
beautifully
clear.
clear. Yeah,
yeah.
it's
But I do think, for the rosé, I will settle it in a very tall tank for a few weeks prior to bottling
mm,
at really cold temperatures, and so that'll help settle out any particulate in the wine.
yeah,
And then, for this, it's just Syrah and Grenache tend to have a lot of particulate in general. They're really inky grapes, and the grape skins break down easily. Um, and I think when we racked the barrels, when you pull the wine off the sediment in the barrels, likely they just got mixed around a tiny bit and just didn't sit in tank long enough. And when I saw that they were a little cloudy going to bottle, I just said, whatever. We're making natural wine. It's fine.
you said this will get me into festivals.
Exactly.
No, the wine is delicious, and just so interesting. Obviously, Grenache, Syrah, kind of a natural pairing, classic Rhone pairing together.
Yeah.
Food pairings with this one, obviously a little more robust, a little richer than what we were talking about with the old vine Syrah.
Yep. I mean, I like the spicy mushroom thing that I was talking about earlier. I think lamb would be delicious.
Eric says beef larb.
Larb would be
Oh,
cool.
interesting.
Yep.
Nice.
Yep, I can see that. But I'm like a grilled rack of lamb sounds incredible to me with this.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah. Lamb would be fantastic with this. You mentioned the ribeye with the previous one, but I could definitely see
Did see that with this.
that
Yep.
with this one, especially like you mentioned the peppery note, like just pepper steak. Like I think actually
Absolutely.
like Chinese pepper steak would be phenomenal with this, I think.
Hmm.
With some broccoli and whatnot would be. delicious. So larb is a Thai dish that it's kind of a you use acid to kind of marinate the beef or the lamb or the chicken or whatever you're using for the beef in it, but it's a sort of a cold salad with a protein in it, Jody. So, yeah. Pistachio, and I assume that's raisin crusted rack of lamb, not
Basil.
basil. Oh, basil. Okay, got it. There you go. Nice.
That sounds delicious.
Awesome.
Eric, you cook a lot.
Eric's a great chef.
Nice. So, Dom,
just we say hi to everyone. Hi, everyone. I work with Dom, so I do sales for him. So just, yeah.
That's why he knows what to pair with the wine.
Yes, exactly. So, Dom, as we kind of wrap up here, let's talk a little bit about why you decided to put your tasting room in Santa Paula as opposed to in Ojai itself.
Yeah, it kind of goes back a little bit to being not corporate, being very different, trying to be cutting edge, trying to go outside the box. We work with different grape varieties, same sort of thing for who we work with, and really trying to reach a young audience. And Ojai is a really great place, and the food scene there is great, but it's very touristy, and especially on the weekends, it's typically more boomers than young people.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like our wines might be missed on them a little bit. It's also a very expensive city. And so I felt like I'd like to put our brands in places where I feel like young people are going to start flocking to. At Santa Paula, I've lived in Santa Paula for a while. I really like the city. It's an old farm town. It's actually the citrus capital of the world. There's more citrus grown there than anywhere on earth.
Take that, Florida.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a nice little fact.
Yeah, it is. So it's very farm centric, very salt of the earth people, but actually a lot of young people. And I've noticed even after we really set roots there and opened our tasting room that it's doubled in size with young people.
It's because Santa Clarita has gotten so expensive that's where
Santa Clarita is expensive, and from Santa Paula, I can get to Hollywood in 50 minutes. If it's in the evening or early morning and there's no traffic. So it's not that far from LA. You're 10 minutes from the beach in Ventura. You're 20 minutes to Ojai. So it's really not that out of the way, but it feels a little bit secluded. The town still has this
45 from Santa Barbara.
Yeah, like 40 from Santa Barbara, 35, 40.
Traffic, it's such an easy day trip from LA. Like just to drive up, not even a day trip. And
the 126 is is it 126, right? Is that
it's 126, yeah.
Much easier road to navigate. So
yeah. So we were looking at Ojai, and I was looking at spaces, and most spaces that were the size we wanted, which is still fairly small, were $10,000 to $15,000 a month for a lease.
Oh gosh.
And I just thought, goodness, this is ridiculous. And my wines are a little out there. Like, I don't want to take that kind of gamble. I'd rather just not have a tasting room at that point.
Right.
And this place came up in Santa Paula. It's right on Main Street and 8th, right on the corner. It's got this massive outdoor space.
It looks like a gas station. Like
and plenty of parking.
It used to be
the most important thing.
A car repair center, and they did oil changes inside. And it's this old brick building that was built in like 1890, and it's just really cool. It's got a lot of character, and it's just like fit the vibe of the brand. The owners are really cool. They used to run an auto repair shop there 50 years ago. They're old, they're retired, and we got along really well. So the whole thing just kind of clicked, and I don't look back on that. I think I probably could have made more money if I opened a tasting room in LA, maybe even in Ojai, but I don't regret it. I think it's a really cool place. It's got a lot of character, and it fits our brand ethos a lot better than I think being in downtown Ojai would. Now, that being said, we're opening a second location right now in Ventura.
Oh, nice.
With an opportunity. There's another winery where the owners are retiring, and they're passing the winery on to us. So we are going to create a second tasting room here in Ventura, and it has a kitchen. So we're going to be having a full-on food menu and tasting menu here.
Jody is going to want the address of that space because she is in Ventura. So
awesome.
Where in Ventura is it?
So it's currently called 4 Bricks.
Oh,
and
okay. Yeah.
it's the old Four Bricks Winery
So is
we're
that
taking
near
over.
where Native Bloom is?
Yes.
It's on that same kind of strip where there's a lot of
Yeah,
breweries
it's
and
down off
wineries on that.
Market.
Yeah.
Hmm.
That'll
Very
be a
nice.
nice, like destination. You go to Native Bloom, you come over to Doctor's Orders, have a little food.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. Yeah, it'll be cool. We'll
exactly.
do a lot of entertainment here too. So it's very, very large.
Very nice. So you've seen good traffic in the Santa Paula location and
We have.
okay.
Yeah. And there's a lot of like interesting things we do there to keep it different and unique.
Yeah.
We've been doing late night boiler room, old school vinyl DJ sets
Oh,
where we'll have
nice.
a vinyl DJ come in and play from like 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and the place will just be absolutely packed. We do car shows there, the old cruiser cars in Santa Paula.
Yep.
We'll do little music festivals. We do a lot of live music there. We do comedy shows there sometimes. We do trivia nights. We'll do wine tasting nights. So we keep it really interesting, and we do get a good crowd in there.
Very nice. And then we should mention that you've kind of was your wife's her teas and the ciders, was that something that she was doing independently of you, or is that something that you guys
No, we've always
started
kind of
together?
made everything together.
Okay.
I named our cider brand after her. It's called Ynez Cider. My wife is
Mhm.
Anna. And then we also have a hard tea company called Jungle Tea. Both of them are certified organic, no sulfites, no carbs, no sugar. Um, the cider's made from West Coast fresh pressed apples, and we use kind of our own flavorings that we make in house. So we'll like grind up fresh fruits or vegetables. One of our flavors is cucumber ginger, so we're literally
Mhm.
out there grinding up cucumbers and ginger and adding that to a fermentation tank. And then for our tea, we're using shade-grown Japanese sencha and Sri Lankan Ceylon tea, black tea, and fermenting those in a cold brew steeped with organic cane sugar. And we ferment that fully dry and condition it in the can like champagne. And so there's no carbs and no sugar. It's fully dry again. So those are our two things. And our parent company is called Fermentation House. So everything we do is under that heading. So both of our tasting rooms are called Fermentation House.
Yeah. So you can do a Google search for Doctor's Orders and you'll come upon them, but look for
Yes,
fermentation.house is
correct. That's the
their
website.
main brand exactly for the website is what you're looking for.
And on Instagram, I'm Dom the Wine Guy. If you want to follow any of my random proclivities.
Yes. Well, yeah, this is normally the part where we ask if people want to follow you, visit you, uh, check you out. We've got the
Absolutely.
Instagram, we've got the location right at the corner of Main and 8th in Santa Paula, fermentation.house. Is there an email? Is there any way they can get in touch with you personally?
Yep. My email is dom at fermentation.house. Feel free to email me anytime. There's a basic email on our website as well that you can go to email our team. If you ever are trying to order or you just want to visit or say hi, feel free to reach out. I try to be as responsive as I can with email. You can also hit me up on Instagram. It's an easy way to contact me. We have a very cool wine club, and love for you guys to join that too. But come visit us at our tasting rooms. We're doing some cool stuff here, and frequently there's things here at our tasting rooms that you just can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, when you're driving up to Paso Robles and go, hey, wait a second, the 5 is
Yeah.
way too jammed. I should take the 101, and you cut across the 126.
Yeah,
Stop by.
that's right.
Um, how many different bottlings do you, how many SKUs do you have?
It changes all the time because I'm weird and I like to always do different things. But
As you should. You should
typically,
mix things up.
typically it's around 20 to 25
Yes.
Okay.
for wine. For wine,
And
sometimes
you
more though. I've done 40 bottlings in a year before.
Seriously?
Yeah.
like were you doing like 10 bottles and stuff? Like I can't even
No, but
imagine.
very small amounts. Usually, yeah, sometimes like 10 cases.
I don't care how small. 40 bottlings is insane.
Yeah, that's
It's a lot.
insane. That's a lot
It's a
of tank
lot.
space right there.
It's one thing when you hear a
I know.
winery that says, oh, like, it was some winery, someone I was in Italy with, where they were talking about how many tanks they have because it's, every pick goes into a different tank and they're managing all that before they blend, which is
Yep.
insanely enough. But then
It's a
to
lot of work.
bottle 40 different wines, just,
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we did at Vineyard. And I think what I learned from that is if you can put different things in bottle, even if it's a small amount, and save them and taste them later, you'll have a better understanding of what the different techniques you used impacted, how they impacted the wine, and whether that's, the right move to make long term or not. So I
Yes.
do that a little bit, and I'll do random things like a different grade of cork. I'll bottle 10 cases under one grade of cork and the rest under a different one. Or I'll do things like, use a tiny bit of acacia oak in one thing and try it and just bottle a little bit. Or, I'll say, hey, I'm going to make one tank ferment at 70 degrees and one tank at 61. And I'm going to bottle those separately and see how those age. Or I'll use, a different Pied de Cuvée yeast slurry for each one and see how those pan out. So there's just little things like that, or 50% whole cluster in this lot and 10% in this, or zero. Just little things, but they make big differences in the wine.
But it really,
I think you
it really
you never
is
fully understand the impact of that until you have it in bottle and it's aged for a year or two. So that's kind of
really
the
kind of
idea.
cool. 'Cause obviously, there's vintage variation that'll go, but if you have the patience, because obviously that takes a lot of patience.
It does.
And
Really,
like
you
willing to
really
sit on the
understand
cost.
the nuance of one thing to a next, and you can see how much is vintage variation. If you can do it over 2 or 3 vintages, you kind of see how much is the vintage affecting that, and how much is the choice of acacia wood or
Right. Well, I think in that case, that's where you really need to have a side by side. So if you have a neutral or a control from that same vintage, then you can isolate immediately what would be vintage variation.
Yeah.
And I have a lot of patience.
You do. Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of tolerance.
And you just
for
have to
like,
be a big nerd. At the end of the day, I'm a big nerd and it's okay.
So are you differentiating all of this when you sell it, or are you like, just saying, oh,
Frequently
buy what we've
not.
got? Yeah.
I usually do make some kind of distinction on the label. I don't ever fool people and just saying, hey, buy this, and it's actually this other thing. But usually it'll say on the label that it's a single barrel or a special bottling of some kind.
But
And
you're not
then
putting 70 degrees versus 61 degrees.
no, usually not. But I also don't sell the small bottlings in the market. So all of that's the sort of thing that you would only be able to buy if you're in our wine club. Occasionally you could buy it at our tasting room, but for the most part, those go to our wine club.
Good to know. So yes, if you want to taste all of Dom's experimentations, you need to join the Fermentation House Wine Club. I'm actually thinking about doing it right now just to see, just to live inside your head and the weird mad scientist is.
It's a weird place to live, trust me.
No, and that was a laugh that was apropos of a mad scientist right there. So it worked out nicely.
Fair.
Okay, I have to ask one last question, which is you mentioned earlier planting an obscure Italian varietal. What is that Italian varietal?
I think the most obscure Italian varietal I planted to date is Montepulciano.
Oh, okay. That's not that obscure.
It's not that obscure. We've done Montepulciano, Nebbiolo, Sangiovese, Barbera in our properties. We've done a little bit of Touriga Nacional, which obviously is not Italian, but it's not common in the US. We've planted Peak Pool Blanc, which is a Rhone variety that most people are not familiar with. I'm sure you are,
very
but
popular
it's not
here
super
in
common
Paso
here.
Robles, yes.
Yeah, in Paso Robles is a little more common. I am sourcing Frappato right now. That's maybe the thing I'm most excited about. So I'm going to plant some Frappato hopefully next year.
You're sourcing it to plant.
Yeah, I'm going to plant it here in Ojai.
That's exciting.
Yeah.
I think I'm pretty well versed in the obscure grapes of Italy. I mean, I'm not saying I've tried them all or that I know them all, but I think I'm pretty well versed. And I was introduced to 2 new grapes that I bet nobody here has ever heard of. I had a Slorina.
Slorina. I've not had Slorina.
I don't think I've heard of Slorina.
And I had wait, hold on, because I can't pronounce it. It's called Baratucciat. It's a white grape. Both Piemontese grapes.
Oh,
cool. Okay. I've had many Piemontese wines.
Baratucciat comes more from near Torino. And then the Slorina, but I was like, I know Grignolino and Fresia and Bruche and, Timorosso and all these other
Verga, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
Like, what the frick is Slorina? But
Albarossa. I've had Albarossa, which is very rare.
I've had Nascetta, the white grape of Barolo, but Slorina. Who knew?
Slorina.
That's cool.
Slorina or Sclarina?
Slorina. Slarina.
It sounds like a disease. Like, oh God,
It
the
does.
doctor told me I have Slorina.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Another grape that I would like to bring in that's not common is Liston Negro,
Oh, yeah.
which is a grape grown in the volcanic soils of the Canary Islands.
Yeah.
I was really fascinated by Envenate winery out there. So kind of exploring bringing some of that out here.
Nice. Although you'd have to find some volcanic soil, I imagine.
Or we have volcanic soil out here.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. In some areas, depends on where you are. But
I
up
know
in
a
the hills in
winery in
Alpine, we do.
Paso that claims to have volcanic soil, but nobody believes them. So
Depends on how far you dig down.
Yeah,
We did a vertical dig at one of our sites with Jeff Newton
Hmm.
from Coastal Vineyard Care. We went down 12 feet and we hit volcanic soil.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, at this point, if anybody wants to unmute themselves, and Dom, we appreciate you staying well over the 8 o'clock. Like I said,
Happy to be
sometimes the
here.
conversation just flows so naturally that you suddenly look at the clock and it's well after 8. But if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask Dom a question, go ahead. Or comment or whatever you'd like.
You're unmuted.
You're unmuted.
You're ready.
Can
You're
I
ready,
ask
Larry.
a
Go ahead.
question?
Go ahead, Sandy.
Could you tell us again the easy way to get in touch with you to be able to taste your wines if we're in their area?
Absolutely. I'd say there's two easy ways. One is you can email me. It's Dom, D-O-M, at fermentation.house.
And I
Or
will,
you can hit.
sorry, Dom. I will send that out tomorrow in the email with the replay of the virtual tasting that we're doing. So that
Cool.
he'll be copied on that tomorrow.
Cool.
So
And
that's
you can also,
Dom at
It's in the chat.
Yeah. Dom at fermentation.house, House.
Dom with an M.
Yeah.
D-O-M.
D-O-M.
dot house as in house. Okay.
Yes.
Correct.
The opposite of sub.
Thank you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I just have to share. I heard something today. I read an article today. Kathleen Wilcox wrote an article talking about this whole push for low alcoholic wine and all this stuff. But she started her article talking about a winery in Napa that charges $1,000 to $5,000 for a tasting.
What?
And
That's wild.
And my only comment to that, not against her article, my only comment was, before we get into that people want low alcohol wines or natural wines, we just have to get to the fact that it is the most arrogant, obnoxious thing. It's called like ghost wines or ghost wines or something. And I went to their website to look, and it literally is $1,000 to $5,000 a person. And I'm like,
and they're doing all low alcohol, no alcohol?
No. She was talking about the allure of
Could you tell me a little more of that?
she positioned it as like, what does the wine industry now? And she goes, when you visit an aspirational tasting room like Ghost Horse in Napa, where tastings run $1,000 to $5,000, there's a stress test. And then she interviewed a bunch of winemakers about what people really want is low alcohol. And I'm like, no, what people really want is that's not even overpriced.
Well, no, it's not $5,000 tastings. I mean, Jesus, like that's one of those where it's like, we're going to operate our tasting room. If we get one tasting per weekend, we've made our money. Like that's the whole.
That's wild.
I was laughing at a winery I went to a few years ago in Calistoga that was $150 to $350 a person, depending on if you had the food pairing, and requires you to buy 6 bottles of wines per person.
Oh, wow.
And I thought that was atrocious and obnoxious.
Yeah.
But I can't believe there's literally a Napa winery charging $1,000 a tasting. I mean,
if you can
I
get
hate that
it,
so
by
much.
all means.
That like makes me feel sick.
Yeah.
What is wrong with the industry is exactly that. Forget the fact that people want different varieties.
Yes, secretary. Anyone could
cheaper wines, or Dom, you're hitting the points on lower alcohol, lower ABV, good prices, interesting varieties. Yes, that's what everyone wants. But I mean, the first way you antagonize people and make wine an elitist thing is by doing this kind of crap.
Not to sound crass, but honestly, how many blowjobs do you get for your $5,000 taste?
Yes.
I mean, it's just, you
Like
wonder
at least a happy ending. I mean, come on,
Morgan
Jesus.
says blowjob prices are much more reasonable, and I don't know.
I'd probably
mean,
rather
if you
just
go to
go
certain
behind a
parts of
dumpster in
Riverside,
downtown
absolutely.
LA
Not
for
for me.
$5.
That's
Yeah.
all.
I imagine if you go over to like, 3rd Street in Santa Paula, you can find the
You know what's kind of, I'm sorry, Chris, I'm trying not to laugh. What gets me is that when I go to a winery to taste, I don't go to drink, I go to buy.
yes.
And when they're charging, and I've been a long time wine club member, like at Trefethen, I was at Au Bon Clement, and many others. When they're charging 75 to 100 to taste,
It's insane.
and what you want to do is buy.
Tell them what I said.
I did.
No,
What did you say?
not the one about the blowjobs. The other one.
Sorry.
Thanks, Morgan.
Here you, dear.
There's a winery here in Paso, Alpha Omega Collective, that like their tastings are, I believe it's 50, like 100 and 150. And what's funny is if you're an industry member, you get half off of those.
But
So
can
you
you
pay.
clarify? You misspoke. Yes, they have a tasting room in Paso. They're a Napa winery.
They are a Napa winery that own a winery down in Edna Valley, and they own a Spanish winery as well, and they pour a few of those.
But if you
I
want to
have
know
a theory about this.
Do you want to know something really funny? You might want to take this off recording.
No, I want to hear Morgan's theory. Go ahead,
I
Morgan.
want you to Google.
Hold on.
I want you guys to Google. I want you to Google Alpha Omega Devin Nunes and see what comes
Well,
up.
yes, yeah, okay. And I should always point out that Paso Seco tastings are just
God,
$15
Devin
to try
Nunes.
3 wines.
Bedbug.
Comes up prostitutes, yachts, and cocaine.
Yes.
Well,
All right,
you had a good
Morgan.
time.
all the
Morgan,
fun
what's
How
your
do I
theory?
connect with them?
All right, so what were you going to say?
Yeah, no, my theory just is that those kinds of like $1,000 to $5,000 for a tasting, that is geared towards a demographic that doesn't know what's good. It only knows what's expensive.
True.
Well,
Absolutely.
but I would say that from a tasting that's $150 to $400.
With her too.
When you've added another zero, I can't even imagine.
Yeah,
This
that's
is
a point where the zero is only there for those who are going to look for the zero. Like the